Chapter 269. Roland held Border Town's first high-level plenary meeting in the castle's reception hall. Compared to the beginning when Barav and his dozen or so apprentices were the only ones to hold the fort, the city hall had now grown to a huge group of nearly 100 people. Among them were fallen nobles, the captured knight and his squires, as well as the natives who had completed their primary education and obtained their diplomas. Thanks to the growth of the population, the various departments had also taken shape one after another, so that the city hall finally had a little bit of the prince's expectation. He no longer had to do everything himself like before. Now he only had to explain some simple policies and programs, and the embryonic city hall could break down the tasks to the various departments to complete, which made Roland feel very gratified. The participants of the first high-level meeting were all the highest heads of the departments, namely the Minister of Agriculture Sirius Daly, the Minister of Education Scroll, the head of the Ministry of Chemical Industry Kyle Sichi, temporary, the head of the Ministry of Construction Car Van Bate, the head of the Army Iron Axe, and the head of the City Hall Bear of Mons. The Ministry of Industry was still personally managed by Roland. After all, except for him, no one knew what industrialization looked like in the end. Beside each person was placed a bucket of ice water, emitting bursts of cool air. The ice placed in the bucket was enchanted by candle, so that it could be soaked in water for at least a whole morning. Even if it was scorching hot outside, the castle hall still maintained a cool temperature. Then each department separately report the recent situation. Roland took out the kettle from the bucket and poured himself a glass of ice water. Let's start with the Ministry of Agriculture. Yes, Your Highness. Sirius got up and saluted, then spread out the prepared paper roll. This time the grain handed in is about 17,000 kilograms. This amount is enough to meet all the townspeople's food needs in the coming summer. In addition, according to your request, the Ministry of Agriculture will purchase the remaining grain at the market price, but this amount is far less than the proportion handed in, currently only 4,500 kilograms. The so-called dendrobium was a commonly used measuring container for wheat. It was a basket made of bamboo, so he only heard the number. He had no idea how to convert it into kilograms or liters. Fortunately, that was not important. The key was that he knew that the food he collected was enough to feed the townspeople. The key point was the second point. If he calculated it according to the method of collecting 70% of the grain and keeping 30% for himself, the amount of grain purchased should be about 7,000 kilograms. The portion that was reserved for grain and seeds for the next year would not be needed at all. In other words, some serfs did not sell the remaining 30% of the grain to the city hall, but chose to privately hoard it in wooden sheds. Although he had foreseen such a situation, he still sighed softly when it actually happened. The purpose of hoarding grain was obvious. They planned to speculate and resell it. If there was a food shortage in the town, or if there was a natural disaster, their grain could be sold at a much higher price than the market price. It was not impossible for the grain to be sold at more than 10 times the market price. This was also the reason why Roland had set the grain trade as the exclusive business of the city hall, and the purchasers had to show their ID cards. The grain problem was related to the most basic stability of Border Town. In the early days, when there was still not a surplus of grain, if they were allowed to sell it, it would be easy for people to buy it and then hoard it, which would eventually lead to a rise in the price of grain. By using the real name system to purchase grain, and at the same time prohibiting other sales channels, the grain price could be maintained at a stable level. Your Highness, why don't you force the purchase of the wheat in the hands of the serfs? Sirius asked doubtfully. In any case, the law doesn't allow them to sell it to others. Because it is their private property, how to deal with it is their freedom, Roland replied. I didn't stipulate that the serfs are not allowed to keep their own grain. You can also understand it as long as there is no explicit prohibition, it is allowed. Sirius looked a little confused, as if he didn't know how to understand this sentence. It wasn't only him, most of the people frowned, only Barav showed a thoughtful expression. Is there anything else you want to report? Roland drank a mouthful of ice water. This concept of emphasizing rules and procedures could only wait for them to slowly comprehend it in the future. In other words, once they understood it, they could be regarded as a qualified official of the new era. Of course, This method could easily lead to the other extreme and lead to the creation of bureaucracy. However, bureaucracy was still better than chaos and disorder or unbridled behavior. Yes, Sirius Daly shook his head. Now that the fields have been harvested, I don't know how to arrange the next year's fallow plan. No, these lands will not be fallowed. Next year they will continue to plant wheat. Roland waved his hand. The piles of manure at the edge of the fields are prepared to fertilize the land. Next, you will instruct the serfs to shovel it into the fields, mix it with the soil, and then continue to pile new manure in the empty space. In the hot and humid summer, it would only take 2 months for the manure to rot, while in the winter it would take about 4 months. By the next spring, not only would the quality of the soil have been improved by the first batch of compost, he would also have a new batch of compost that could be used as base fertilizer, so there would be no need to fallow the fields. Not to mention the advanced fertilizer, just the use of human and animal manure in agricultural production would already be a great improvement. Well, if this is your request. He touched his head. In addition, Your Highness, I'm afraid that 1 or 2 stone mills won't be enough to grind so much wheat. I want to apply for the construction of a mill next to the Redwater River, preferably powered by a steam engine. Yes, Roland nodded. This was a new breakthrough. In addition to himself, there was finally someone else who was trying to use this new power. You first put forward your plan to Barov, and after obtaining the funds, you can work out a detailed plan with the Ministry of Construction. Yes, Your Highness, Sirius responded. The last matter is the promotion of the freedmen. This time a total of 516 people were qualified for promotion, because it was strictly based on the amount of wheat submitted on the spot, so no one raised any objections. I have already submitted the list to Sir Barov. Then he once again stood up and saluted. My report is finished. Well done. Roland clapped his hands twice to show his encouragement. This former young knight of the Wolf family now seemed to have adapted to life in Border Town. Moreover, he was also doing a good job in the city hall. With a little packaging he would become an excellent publicity example, and in the future when it came to recruiting the fallen nobles of Longsong Stronghold and the Knight, he would be able to play a big role. The second to give the report was Scroll. Her long hair was coiled behind her head. She was wearing a clean and tidy white shirt, matched with a pure black skirt without any decoration or lace. She looked mature and capable. It was hard to imagine that half a year ago, she was still an exiled witch who had to hide from the church. At present, there are 2 batches of people who have completed their primary education, a total of 85 people, most of whom have studied at the academy opened by Mr. Carr. Her ability was a photographic memory, so when she reported the data she didn't need to do any preparation. This made Roland very envious. Among them, 46 people have chosen to work in the city hall, 21 people have decided to work in the bicycle factory, 13 people have applied to join the First Army, here she paused, and 5 people have applied to work in the chemical laboratory. 5 people? Roland couldn't help but look at Kyle Sichi. The latter's complexion obviously didn't look good. It seemed that the publicity effect of the award ceremony was far from what he had expected. In this way, the 3 new laboratories might have to be idle for some time. Chapter 270. When it was the Ministry of Chemical Industries' turn, Kyle snorted, Your Royal Highness, I hope you can find the person in charge as soon as possible. I don't want to attend this kind of meeting again. Roland secretly rolled his eyes. After becoming a leader, he found that he had to selectively ignore some words. How could it be so easy to find a talent who dabbled in alchemy and chemistry? Do you have any clue about the large-scale production of the 2 acids? No, Kyle shrugged. That's why I need to spend more energy and more manpower on this project, instead of sitting here and wasting time. After staying in Border Town for a long time, his words also contained some Roland's vocabulary. If I have to report, I can only say that the laboratory is short of people, the more the better. In addition, although the 5 people who joined recently are young, they are quite clever. It seems that the primary education you created is still useful. Well, the chief alchemist was probably the most disrespectful to him, but considering his age and his enthusiasm for chemical experiments, Roland didn't have any resentment. After all, after the explosion accident and being completely cured by Nana, His first reaction was unexpectedly to be able to unscrupulously carry out experiments, and even to taste the taste of different acids. This kind of enthusiasm was really unparalleled. Well, you continue your research. I'll ask Barav to find a way to fill the personnel gap. By the way, Your Royal Highness, Kyle opened his mouth again, have you finished writing your intermediate chemistry? If you can give it to me for reference, maybe I can come up with a large-scale acid production method earlier. I said at the award ceremony that as long as you can train enough apprentices and assistants to fill the new laboratory, I will give you the book. Roland spread out his hands. In fact, he hadn't written a single word of the book yet, just the elementary chemistry alone had already exhausted his limited knowledge of chemistry. Even if he racked his brains for the intermediate chemistry, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to write more than a few pages of content. The fourth was the Minister of Construction, Car Van Bate. First of all, I want to thank Lady Scroll. He first nodded to Scroll and said, I'm really happy to know that those children can graduate smoothly. Compared to the chief alchemist, Mr. Stonemason's social skills were worlds apart. Scroll nodded in return and said, It's my duty. Then, Carr opened the notebook he carried with him and said in an orderly manner, Nowadays, the town's various projects are progressing steadily. The main projects are the Kingdom Avenue, the Redwater Bridge, the new residential area and the new city wall. Among them, the number of people working on the construction of the Kingdom Avenue had reached 4,500, half of which came from Longsong Stronghold, and it was expected to be completed next spring. The Shershue Bridge is still under the construction of the underground mud wall, and the residential area has been expanded to the vicinity of the old city wall. The number of construction workers is about 1,000. As long as we can guarantee the supply of bricks and cement, we should be able to complete the task of moving all the Eastern Region refugees into the town before the arrival of the months of the demons. Since Carr often reported to Roland about the progress of the project, he did not mention anything about the expansion of the castle district or the construction of the witch house. In addition, after the location of the new city wall was set and the wire was pulled, the construction was completely done by Lotus, and the daily progress was maintained at around 100 meters. You've worked hard, Roland nodded. The Ministry of Engineering was the largest department in terms of personnel and funding, so the results were also the most. While speeding up the construction, don't forget to publicize Border Town's preferential treatment policy. After a year of practice, these handymen from Longsong Stronghold can also be regarded as qualified craftsmen, so you have to keep them in Border Town as much as possible. Yes, Your Highness, Carr replied. Then the next one. Iron Axe. This was the first time Iron Axe had participated in such a meeting, so he was obviously not used to it. He cleared his throat and said, Your Highness, there are two main things about the army. First of all, the Second Army has completed its basic training and can be sent to Longsong Stronghold at any time. Second, with the addition of new blood, the First Army now has 825 people. Apart from the 350 people in the artillery team, the rest of the soldiers have all been equipped with revolving rifles. That's all I have to say. After reporting, he gave a military salute. Good, let the Second Army set off tomorrow. Remember to place reliable people in the team, while in Longsong Stronghold, daily training and ideological training must not be interrupted, and every week report to Border Town, Roland instructed. The last one to speak was Barav. He first looked around at the crowd, then calmly saluted Roland and said, Your Highness, since the last time we paid the Marjorie Chamber of Commerce's transportation fee and the cost of Theo's mission, the City Hall's treasury stock has been severely reduced. Coupled with the harvest this time, the Ministry of Agriculture is still purchasing food at the normal market price, resulting in the stock of Golden Dragon only a little more than 2,000. This can be considered a relatively dangerous limit. 2,000 Golden Dragon. Compared to last winter, it was undoubtedly a huge amount of money, but Roland also knew that the current situation of Border Town was not the same as it was in the past. Just the monthly payment of more than 5,000 workers in the Ministry of Works was already a huge expense. There was also the current high salary of the First Army, the factory, the chemical laboratory, and the City Hall, all of which required a large amount of Golden Dragon. In other words, Border Town was now making money fast, but also spending money fast, and this was based on the fact that most of the materials and machinery were self-sufficient. I know. But at the beginning of next month, when the Marjorie caravan arrives in Border Town, we will be able to earn another income by selling the steam engine, Roland responded. Moreover, the purchase of food and the transportation of fugitives are not part of the daily expenses, so in the next 6 months, the treasury stock should be able to steadily increase. You don't need to worry too much. He paused. In addition, I intend to raise everyone's salary. Raise the salary? Barav was startled. Yes, today the City Hall is no longer an institution that only relies on a dozen people to run. Your workload has greatly increased, so naturally your salary will also increase. The prince laughed. Starting from this month, your salary will be raised to 5 golden dragons per month, the department head will receive 2 golden dragons per month, and then according to this ratio, the apprentices and assistants will also be uniformly raised. Rest assured, this amount of money is not much, only about 20 or 30 golden dragons. Although 5 golden dragons for the position of the City Hall director was not a generous amount, but Roland knew that what Barav loved more was power. At present, Border Town's financial income and expenditure were all calculated and distributed by him, and without any supervision department, he could casually obtain 100 times the income. And so far, he had not shown any signs of embezzlement. Of course, in addition to relying on the other party's self-awareness, Roland could also use Nightingale's ability to maintain the integrity of the department. Under her questioning, no one could conceal their misdeeds. In addition, there is one thing that you may already know, he continued. I intend to officially build a city here after the end of the months of the demons. In other words, Border Town will be upgraded to a real city. This big city will reach the barbarian land in the west, Longsong stronghold in the east, and the hills and seas in the south. Its city walls will be natural mountains and natural strongholds, and its area will be far larger than King's City, or even any city in the 4 kingdoms. Chapter 271. At the end of the meeting, Roland left Barav alone. As you can see, the chemical laboratory and Grey Castle Industries need people. Next, I plan to produce soap and perfume on a large scale, which also requires a lot of manpower. The prince said bluntly, when most of the townspeople pass the primary education examination, it will be at least next year, and there will only be 600 or 700 people, which is not enough. I need more people. If you conscript people from the stronghold. No, Roland interrupted, after the city is built next year, the stronghold and the town will be connected as a whole, which is equivalent to taking money out of the left pocket and putting it into the right pocket. I need more people outside the western region. This. Barav was a little embarrassed. I'm afraid it's not so easy to solve. If you go to other cities to fish people out, the local lord will not sit idly by. Don't go to the city. Roland dipped his finger into the cup, dipped it in ice water, and gestured on the table. I don't know if you have noticed, but since the end of the months of demons, Grey Castle has been in a state of war. Including Timothy's several attacks on the southern territory, which led to the burning of Eagle City, and serious damage to the surrounding villages and towns. Then there was the expedition to the northern territory, depriving Duke Ace of his title and territory for treason. Lastly, there was the attack on the sea in the east. He knocked the table twice, leaving a pool of water stain. It affected Seawinshire, Valencia, and Cold Raven Castle quite a bit. Not to mention those small towns in the surrounding area. Just from the number of people who fled to the capital, you can see how heavy the losses were. You mean? Barav showed a thoughtful expression. Spread the news of the western region. The prince smoothed out the water. In the past 6 months, only the western region has been peaceful. There has been no forced conscription, nor has it been attacked by the flames of war. Especially the first point, since Timothy has wantonly used civilians to fight, he will definitely recruit and even abduct civilians from all over the country. No one can guarantee that this kind of thing won't happen to them next time, so a safe place isolated from the flames of war is the main point of our propaganda. I think I understand, he pondered. You intend to attract civilians from other towns and villages by promising not to be conscripted, not to be forced into labor, and at the same time, to provide shelter, food, and a stable job? Almost. Roland nodded with a smile. Being flexible and receptive had always been an assistant minister's strong points. Also, we should focus on promoting the generous treatment that literate people can enjoy. I think there must be some desperate knight and nobles in these places who are willing to come to the western region to try their luck. Whether it was a village or a town, it was almost always the territory of a small noble. If it was a time of peace, no matter how barren the land was, no matter how poorly managed it was, a few acres of farmland would always be enough to fill their stomachs. However, if there was a serious loss of population during times of turmoil, it would be hard for them to continue living. At this time, if there was a safe place to go, most people would be tempted. In any case, even if the territory was left unguarded, it would not be occupied by others. After this period of time, they would bring money and mercenaries back to take over the territory. As for how to promote it, he believed that the other side had their own ways. But Your Highness, in this way, it will be another expense to arrange for these people, and the purchase of food cannot be interrupted, Barav said hesitantly. In case something happens to the caravan, the city hall treasury will soon run dry. Well, what you said makes sense, Roland touched his chin. The most important task of the new political power was to establish prestige and confidence in the hearts of the people. If they suddenly fell into a predicament where they could not pay their salaries, the good situation would take a sharp turn for the worse. Well, you go back and make a plan first. Wait until the caravan and border town have completed the next month's transaction, and after the treasury is full, then you can implement it. Yes, Your Highness, Barav said while putting his hand on his chest. After finishing his task, Roland returned to his office and began to think about how to complete Marjorie's balloon order. The unit price of 1,000 golden dragon balloons was even higher than that of a steam engine, but its cost was much lower. The airbag was mainly drawn by Soroya, while the hemp rope and bamboo basket were cheap goods. In fact, Roland had already trial-produced a simple sample in the arsenal's courtyard, a hydrogen balloon that could carry both Lightning and Maggie into the sky at the same time. After repeated consideration, he finally abandoned the hot air balloon plan. Gas needed to be obtained by dry distillation of coal, the equipment would take up a large area, and the manufacturing process would be very troublesome. In addition, coal had to be imported from other towns, so small-scale production was not cost-effective. It was far less convenient and easy to obtain than hydrogen. The trial product was made with a single-sided water coating, and after the painting was finished, the paper on the back was also burned, so the entire balloon was almost weightless, and its flexibility was also very outstanding. In the experiment, the inflated balloon was not afraid of rain, impact, or fire. Even when Maggie transformed into a variety of birds and fiercely pecked at it, there was not a single trace left behind. Only an iron needle could barely pierce through this 1 millimeter thick coating. Due to its extremely light weight, a hydrogen balloon with a diameter of about 2 meters could carry an adult person into the sky. The only difficulty was how to solve the problem of inflating the high-pressure hydrogen cylinder. The DC motor used for electrolysis of water to produce hydrogen could not be sold. A motor connected to a steam engine could inflate all the hydrogen balloons, which was obviously not cost-effective. If he wanted to continuously earn Golden Dragon from rich people, he must have a high-pressure cylinder that could be repeatedly inflated. The cylinder itself was not difficult. If the material was not good enough, the wall thickness could be supplemented, pig iron or wrought iron could be used. In any case, with Anna, precision processing was not a problem. The key was the inflation. In the previous generation, the pressure of the gas storage cylinder was more than 20 MPa. Wanting to rely on a pump to inflate it was undoubtedly a fantasy. Even 10 Chilean arms would be useless, at least a high-pressure air pump was needed. And if the pressure inside the cylinder was not enough, it was simply impossible to fill the hydrogen balloon. The high-pressure air pump was divided into piston air and turbine air pump. The former belonged to the technology tree of internal combustion engines, while the latter belonged to the category of turbines. No matter which one was developed, it was a large and time-consuming project. Until the evening, Roland finally came up with the simplest solution, self-inflating the cylinder. What gave him this inspiration was a piece of news that he had seen before he traveled to this world. A street vendor selling hydrogen balloons used a modified liquefied gas tank to store hydrogen, which resulted in an explosion, causing a tragedy. The reason was that the vendor directly reacted with dilute sulfuric acid and aluminum to produce hydrogen without calculating the amount of reaction. As a result, the pressure inside the tank was too high, and the tank directly burst. The method of self-inflating was to pour dilute sulfuric acid and active metal into the bottle to replace the hydrogen. Zinc was commonly used in the laboratory, and aluminum was the most common element that could produce hydrogen by weight. However, neither of these two elements were available in this era, so Roland still planned to use iron to react. Lucia could separate iron with extremely high purity, and the slow reaction speed at room temperature could be improved by heating and increasing the contact area, such as iron sheets and iron powder. An inner coating would be able to resist the corrosion of acid on the bottle. Thinking of this, he immediately drew a simple sketch on the paper. In order to reduce air leakage, the high-pressure cylinder should be as one piece as possible, so the body of the cylinder should be integrated, leaving only a raised threaded hole at the top, which could be screwed into the valve nozzle. After injecting the reactant from the hole and tightening the valve, the continuously produced gas had nowhere to go, and the pressure inside the bottle could reach a very impressive value. When in use, as long as the valve was opened, the hydrogen would rush out and rush into the air sac. Reflushing was also very convenient. After removing the valve, drying the water, and cleaning out the ferrous sulfate crystals, the reactant could be poured in again. Considering that dilute sulfuric acid was also an alchemy product, the inflating price obviously could not be set too low. Chapter 272. When Kyle Sichi returned home after finishing today's experiment, his wife had already made pancakes and mushroom soup. She also poured him a glass of white wine. The latter two items were sold in the convenience market, especially the white and huge mushrooms. As the introduction on the sign said, "You can't find anything more delicious than this." After tasting it, he found that it was true. After eating one piece, it was hard to forget the full and unique taste. Of course, it was also very expensive. A palm-sized flower cost 1 silver royal. If it were not for the high salary, Kyle would not have bought such expensive food. There were many things like this, such as soap and mirrors. As long as one had money, life in the town was much more comfortable than that of the common nobles. Roland was simply unfathomable. This was also what he felt the most. After dinner, his wife handed him a letter. "This is... the guards sent it this afternoon. You hadn't come back yet?" his wife said while cleaning up the tableware. According to him, it seems to be from Redwater City. Really? Kyle walked into the study, cut open the envelope with a knife, and took out the letter and opened it. The first sentence was, "Hello, dear mentor." This was a letter from Chavez. He could not help but smile. He sat at the desk and carefully read it. It turned out that after he left the Redwater City Alchemy Workshop, another alchemist, Capora, became the new chief alchemist. However, this man was narrow-minded. After obtaining the crystal glass formula left by Kyle, he not only claimed to the Lord that it was the work of him and Kyle, but also intentionally or unintentionally excluded Chavez in the alchemy experiment. In the letter, he complained that perhaps it was because he borrowed Capra's apprentice when exploring the double-stone acid-making method, but in the end, he did not inform Capora of the results in advance. Now, several other alchemists seemed to have begun to avoid him, intentionally or unintentionally, which made Chavez very annoyed. Kyle could roughly understand their thoughts. As the youngest alchemist in the refining room, many people thought that Chavez stood out among the many apprentices only by luck and his appreciation. However, the chief alchemist sneered at this view. Saltpeter and green vitriol were both common materials. The reason why it was Chavez who discovered the double-stone acid-making method and not others was enough to explain the problem. Observation, memory, bold conjectures, and careful experiments were all indispensable. This young man's talent was even above his own. In the end, Chavez also attached 2 alchemy formulas to the letter, saying that he had recently discovered 2 acids and wanted to share it with his mentor. Kyle could tell at a glance that the essence of these two formulas was nothing more than the neutralization reaction of acid and base to produce salt. He could write more than a dozen such formulas in one breath. Kyle Sichi sighed and put down the letter. His eyes moved to the elementary chemistry book that had been flipped through several times on the table. The thing that changed everything was the ancient book that Her Highness had given him. If it wasn't for it, perhaps he would still be like Chavez, still searching for the surface soil in the chaos and confusion, and treating it as a treasure. He took the book and flipped to the last page. It was a table that was neatly divided into more than 100 squares. Every time he saw this form, he couldn't help but get goosebumps. He felt an indescribable reverence and fear. The upper left corner of the grid was marked with a small serial number. Until the end, there was a total of 118. In addition to the first two rows, most of the grid was blank, but there were some in the middle that were filled with symbols. For example, number 26, iron, number 29, copper. The table's name was Periodic Table of Elements. The chief alchemist had shakily held the book and asked Roland about the contents of the blank spaces. The answer he got was that it was originally filled, but he couldn't remember. If the other side wasn't His Royal Highness, what he wanted to do the most was to slap the whole book on his face. According to the book, this table included all the elements in the world. If alchemy existed in the Holy Bible, there was no doubt that it would be the most dazzling chapter in the Holy Bible. But what made him afraid was, in the end, what kind of person would be able to draw such a chart? If they had already reached this point, then what about alchemy? It was nothing more than a crooked castle built by a group of children in the mud. Kyle suddenly remembered His Royal Highness' promise. If he could also call Chavez over, and also pull a group of apprentices that he didn't have enough time to take with him last time, maybe there would be hope to fill up the 3 new laboratories. In this way, the yearning intermediate chemistry would also be in his hands. Thinking of this, he immediately took out a piece of white paper and began to write a reply. In fact, during the meeting, His Royal Highness had asked him whether he had a clue about large-scale acid production, but he didn't tell him the truth because the content was complicated and lengthy, and it would be a waste of time to talk about it. Most importantly, he didn't know whether this plan would work or not. After all, the method he had conceived was completely based on the elements and reaction principles in the book. Compared with the previous alchemy experiments, this hypothesis was even a bit like a child's ravings in his dreams. Using materials that had never been seen before and reactions that had never been heard of to produce something that seemed to have nothing to do with the raw materials, just because they had the same element. However, Kyle Sichi had a faint premonition that this method might work. After all, the previous hundreds of replacement experiments all proved the correctness of the content in the book. With a preliminary plan, the next step was to complete a full set of theoretical experiments in the laboratory, because His Royal Highness had said that the process of large-scale production of products could also be reproduced in the laboratory. He quickly finished writing the letter. He didn't try to persuade Charles too much, but directly told this former disciple about the knowability, measurability, and attainability of alchemy. Kyle believed that any wise man who was interested in alchemy would not let go of such an opportunity to see the truth. He folded the letter, put it into an envelope, and sealed it with wax. Then he just had to wait until tomorrow to give it to a merchant who was willing to deliver the letter. After finishing all this, his line of sight once again moved to the periodic table of elements. If the blank space on the table could never be filled up, Kyle would only feel that life would be boring in the future. Fortunately, the last words of His Royal Highness Roland made him excited, and those words still lingered in his ears. Don't show that expression. Each element on the periodic table is arranged according to a rule. You can completely rely on yourself to fill it up. Rule? The arrangement? Do you mean that unknown elements can also be derived, just like the derivation of alchemy formulas? Yes, even if you have never seen them, you can still describe their appearance and characteristics. Then, what is this rule? Chapter 273. The deeper they went into the mine, the more humid the environment inside the cave became. Sylvie carefully avoided the water dripping from the top of her head, holding the torch and slowly moving forward in the cave. Even if there was no light, the eye of truth wouldn't be blocked by the darkness. She only did this to save her magic. We've reached the fork. Nightingale, who was walking in the front, stopped. Which cave is this? Number 23 is the first fork in the second door. Lightning took out the record book and glanced at it. I hope this is the end, Sylvie muttered and opened her eyes, which were completely shaped by magic. The left side is out of the mining area, no ore. The right side is the same. Lightning wrote down the result. So, this cave has one last door left to check. Let's go. Nightingale went from the front of the team to the back and led everyone back the way they came. Her ability didn't seem to be as simple as invisibility. Sylvie could only faintly see Nightingale's magic changes, but was unable to capture her figure and movements. According to Lightning's introduction, she was the strongest combat witch in the Witch Cooperation Association. This might be the reason why Roland asked her to follow him. There were rumors that this mine was once the lair of an ancient monster, and there had been several cases of miners disappearing before. Before they set off, His Royal Highness had repeatedly told them to be careful, and if they encountered an uncertain situation, they should first retreat from the mine and then report to him. Sylvie didn't think much of it. There were no monsters that could escape the detection of the magic eye. She could even see the animal carcasses and the wriggling soft-bodied worms in the stone walls clearly. The expedition had a total of 4 people. In addition to herself, Nightingale, and Lightning, there was also a little girl named Lucia. Every time she found an ore, she would turn it into a variety of fragments, and then carefully classify them and put them in her pocket, saying that she would give them to His Royal Highness to identify. Lightning was responsible for drawing the topographic map of the mine. Of course, according to her own words, no adventure could be without her. Her proud tone reminded Sylvie of the captain who was temporarily stationed on Sleeping Island. Cave 23 was a huge and deep cave near the bottom of the mining area. After a few hundred steps, it divided into 3 forks. If they continued to go deeper along these forks, they would find more branches. However, by then, they would have almost extended out of the mining area, and the possibility of finding a mineral vein was very low. Therefore, they would only go this far. Returning to the first fork, which was the door Lightning had recorded, Sylvie used her ability to observe the situation of the 3 doors of Cave 23. The wider the scope of the Eye of Truth, the greater the magic consumption, and a heavy burden on the body, so she chose to observe at each fork, one at a time. Another 3 doors. There's no ore and there's... She paused for a moment. There are 5 forks, and one of them seems to lead downwards. Down? Lightning repeated. That's right. Sylvie looked again, the slender passage not long after turning a corner, heading straight to the mining area. When she wanted to continue to observe along this fork, a strong dizziness rushed into her mind, cutting off her connection with the magic eye. I think it may lead to a deposit. But this explanation was very far-fetched. The intricate caves in the North Slope mine were obviously not artificially excavated, so they would not specifically look for ore. The unknown vein they had found before was sandwiched between 2 forks, and if not for the Eye of Truth, which could see through obstacles, it would be impossible to find the pile of metal and stone hidden under the stone walls and soil. No matter what it is, we'll know once we go and see, Nightingale shrugged. The group of people entered the 3rd door of the cave, and after about a quarter of an hour, they reached the end of the passage. They saw that the passage here was divided into 5, the narrowest of which could not allow people to walk, so they could only crawl in. And the strange passage that Sylvie had seen before was located in the middle of the 5 forks. The terrain suddenly turned downwards, almost forming a steep slope with the ground they were now standing on. It looks quite deep. Nightingale shone a torch. I always feel that the caves here are somewhat similar to those I saw in the impassable cliff. After the inspection, we should hurry back. Lucia could not help but grab Nightingale's arm. I don't like it here. I always feel that there is something staring at us from inside the cave. There is nothing in the cave except mud and stones, Sylvie said, although she also did not like this quiet and damp place, but her ability told her that there was no danger here. The 4 forks on the left and right are all without or out of the mining area. She quickly scanned the straight forks. moved her eyes to the one in the middle, and then slightly startled. "What's wrong?" Lightning asked. "I can't see the situation below." "You can't see?" The little girl was surprised. "Is it because you are too tired that your ability failed? Let's take a rest." "No, it's not a problem with your ability." Sylvie closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, all she could see was darkness, as if she had been deprived of her vision. She endured the headache and further expanded her field of vision, but the result was still the same. The surrounding soil was clearly visible, only the middle was completely shrouded in endless darkness, as thick as ink. "Something is blocking my view. All of you stay here and don't move." Nightingale pulled out 2 silver weapons. "I will go down to explore the situation. I will be back soon." "Don't go." Sylvie pressed her hand on her swollen forehead to stop her. "There is only one thing that can produce such an effect. Even if you go, you will be in danger." "What is it?" "God's Stone of Retaliation," she said, gritting her teeth. "There is a God's Stone of Retaliation underground, and it is the kind that can cover the entire area." When Roland learned of this news, he immediately mobilized the soldiers of the First Army to enter the North Slope mine. And the final result of the investigation was just as Sylvie had guessed. The deep cave at the bottom of the mine contained a huge amount of God's Stone of Retaliation. After confirming that there was no danger, Roland also entered the 23rd cave under the protection of his guards. He also wanted to see with his own eyes what a God's Stone of Retaliation that could cover the entire bottom of the mountain looked like. "Your Highness, please be careful," Carter warned. "The exit is in front of us. You can't use magic here. It is safer for you to stay above." Roland looked back at Anna, Nightingale, and Lightning, who were following behind him. "Isn't it good to learn from Sylvie? Even without magic, I am still more powerful than you. If you can come, then of course I can come." Nightingale curled her lips. "Wherever there is an adventure, there will be me," Lightning said with her chest out. Anna didn't say anything. She just stared straight at Roland. Seeing those clear eyes that reflected the light of the torches, Roland knew that whatever he said would be useless. "Well," he sighed, "you must follow me, don't stray too far away." Walking along the slope of the cave to the end, Roland suddenly understood what the chief knight meant by the exit. His line of sight suddenly became clear. An incomparably deep cave appeared in front of him. Chapter 274. Roland quickly estimated the volume of the underground cave. The bottom was almost the size of a football field, surrounded by steep mountain walls. The path leading to this place was right in the middle of the mountain wall, and next to the entrance of the cave was a narrow stone staircase, extending all the way down. "I guess this staircase wasn't created by you." He crouched down and put the torch close to the ground. Under the illumination of the fire, the traces of axe and knife carvings on the stone steps were very obvious, and there were also a lot of stone chips and dust accumulated in the carvings. "Of course not, Your Highness. When we found this place, the stone steps were already here." Carter shrugged. "I guess this thing has been here for decades. Or hundreds of years," Anna suddenly said. "I also think so," Lightning nodded. "Border Town has been established for less than 70 years. The stone staircase is unlikely to be related to the locals or the kingdom." "Were there people in the western region hundreds of years ago?" Carter questioned. Grey Castle hadn't even been established yet. Roland patted the knight's shoulder. 450 years ago, there was a group of people forgotten by history. Then he raised the torch. Let's go down and take a look." The soldiers of the First Army had already surrounded the bottom of the cave in 2s and 3s. He took the knight and the witch straight to the side of the God's Stone of Retaliation. Only when standing at the foot of the stone pillar could they deeply feel the huge size of the God's Stone. When they opened their arms, they couldn't even reach a tenth of its size, and they had to look up to see its top. The highest purple God's Stone of Retaliation was nearly 30 meters tall, almost equivalent to an 8 or 9-story high house. In theory, a stone that could emit light by itself was either a radioactive material or a fluorescent component, but the light of the God's Stone of Retaliation obviously had nothing to do with either. The former's light came from the ionization phenomenon of the air caused by the decay of the element itself. The shorter the half-life, the greater the brightness. According to this brightness, The soldiers who entered first would only be able to hold on for a few minutes before dying from the ionizing radiation. The latter, on the other hand, needed to be exposed to light before it could emit light. There was no light source in the depths of the ground, so it was obviously unable to support its continuous emitting of cold light. Roland also noticed that although the god's stone had the usual prismatic shape of a crystal, there were no crystal patterns on its surface. Instead, it was as smooth as flat glass. A thumb-sized god's stone of retaliation in the church can be sold for several golden dragon coins. A god's stone of retaliation as big as this can practically empty the coffers of the four kingdoms. Carter couldn't help but sigh. Sold to the nobles to kill witches? Nightingale glared at him. I didn't say that. The chief knight subconsciously looked away. This is the first time I've seen a god's stone of retaliation in this color. Shouldn't it be white and transparent? Lightning curiously looked at the stone pillar. If I bring one back, will I not need to light candles at night? I'd rather light a dozen candles in a stuffy room than use it for illumination, Nightingale said, crossing her arms over her chest. For a witch, it's a cage, a shackle, an accomplice of the church. It would be great if this damn stone didn't exist in this world. Well, Sister Nightingale, you won't be at night anyway? The little girl licked her lips, picked up a stone, and looked at Roland. Can I take one back as a trophy for my adventure? Roland nodded. If you don't dislike this kind of thing. She swung the stone in her hand, and with all her strength hit the corner of the prism, only to hear a ding sound. The stone was broken, but not even a scratch was left on the prism. The knight couldn't help but exclaim, "What's going on? Aren't God's stones of retaliation fragile?" Perhaps this one's light is different. Lightning brushed off the stone chips in her hand and took out a dagger from her waist bag. She tried to scratch the prism for a while, but even after scraping, cutting, and picking, it was still in vain. Roland felt something was wrong. He signaled to Nightingale, "You try it." The latter nodded, pulled out a revolver, and directly pulled the trigger on another prism. A huge roar suddenly echoed in the bottom of the cave, and the place where the god's stone of retaliation was hit emitted a few sparks. After the smoke dispersed, the group walked over, only to see that the bullet had only left a shallow mark on the surface of the god's stone of retaliation. This meant that, in terms of strength, it had already surpassed a homogeneous steel plate. Even the flintlock is useless? Carter frowned. Then how did the church cut it down, polish it, and sell it? No one could answer this question, and this was also not in line with everyone's usual impression. At least, Roland had once used a brick to break the god's lock of retaliation, such as the one tied around Anna's neck, and only needed 2 or 3 hits to turn the crystal-clear stone into a pile of white powder. Anna, who had been silent all this time, suddenly opened her mouth. "Your Royal Highness, do you remember the treasure map drawn by Philin Eltec, the Light of Dawn?" Treasure map? Roland stared blankly. He vaguely remembered that on the map, there was a triangle that occupied more than half of the map, and the other 3 points were pointing at the holy city of Tequila, the stone tower of the concealing forest, and the end of the North Slope Mountain. Wait, the foot of the North Slope Mountain. Chapter 275. After dinner, Kendall walked into the castle hall early. Every time night fell, Teacher Scroll would give a lecture in the hall. Unlike the aristocratic academies in the big cities, the students who came to listen were all witches of the Witch Cooperation Association. But she wasn't the first one to arrive at the classroom. Evelyn was already sitting at the long table and waving at her. "Did His Highness Roland recently give you any tasks?" Kendall had just sat down when Evelyn couldn't wait to ask. She remembered that when she had just arrived, she had dryly called him Lord. Kendall secretly laughed in her heart. "Yes, he asked me to use my ability on some grotesquely shaped metal lumps, solidifying them at room temperature, but I don't know what use they have." Is that so?" Her eyes dimmed. "His Highness still hasn't asked me to do anything. Is there no regulation on the content of the practice?" Kendall asked strangely. "No, I just casually practice by myself," Evelyn shook her head. "He only occasionally asks me to taste the newly formulated liquor. Maybe this is what His Highness likes." You have been in a tavern, so you are very familiar with the taste of all kinds of wine. There aren't many witches like this. But you don't need a witch to taste wine, she protested. A golden dragon's salary is enough to hire a professional winemaker. Candle patted the other's shoulder. I think His Highness definitely has his own plans. Scroll also comforted me like this, but even I don't know what I can do with this ability. I can't just turn water into wine out of thin air. Is it to make the best wine to sell? But the commoners can only afford to drink poor ale, and the nobles have different tastes. Evelyn put her chin on the table and said in frustration, "Moreover, the wine His Highness makes is getting more and more unpleasant. I have suggested adding water or fruit juice to blend, but he only seems to want to make the strongest wine." Candle didn't know what to say for a while. In this regard, she and Evelyn could be said to be in the same boat. After going to Sleeping Island, they could only do chores most of the time. As the fish oil became more abundant, solidified candles became dispensable. Lady Tilly even forbade drinking. In the early days, when life was tight, the resources were often distributed according to one's ability. Sometimes, Candle could only get a grilled fish that was not covered with salt. She didn't think there was anything wrong with this practice, and she was also willing to give more food to the witches who consumed a lot of magic power. But the fact that witches were divided into different groups and had a vague sense of rejection made her feel a little uncomfortable. Fortunately, Lady Tilly took good care of them and apologized for this method of distribution. She also promised to adjust it when the resources were abundant in the future, so the witches did not reject them too obviously. But in Border Town, this kind of situation had almost never happened. The witches all sat at the same table and enjoyed the meal together with His Royal Highness, wearing the same clothes and using the same things. The most important thing was that, regardless of whether they were powerful or not, they all regarded each other as a whole, which could be seen from their daily interactions. Although she had only been in Border Town for a short period of 2 weeks, she had already deeply felt this point. They really regarded each other as their own sisters. This made Candle feel very envious. When all the witches sat down one after another, Teacher Scroll came in holding a stack of white paper. "Today I won't teach you new content, I will conduct a comprehensive test on what you have learned." "What is that?" Lightning was the first to raise her hand. "Cuckoo?" Maggie followed closely behind. "You have been studying for 3 months now, so His Royal Highness thinks it is necessary to test your learning results." Scroll laughed. "All the questions have been listed on these papers, divided into 3 parts: kingdom language, mathematics, and nature. There are a total of 60 questions. If you answer correctly, you will get points, and if you answer incorrectly, you will lose points. Of course, if you don't understand the questions, you can't raise your hand to ask. I believe that you have already mastered the basics of reading and writing, otherwise even if you know the answer, you will not be able to answer." She paused. "By the way, His Royal Highness said that only those who answer more than half of the questions correctly will be able to enjoy the weekend afternoon ice cream dessert. If your score is lower than this limit, you will be disqualified from afternoon tea." Candle heard a clatter behind her, turned around, and saw Nightingale with a dumbfounded look. The charcoal pen that had fallen to the ground had broken into 2 pieces. In addition, His Royal Highness also specifically said that the 5 witches from Sleeping Island are not included, so you can stay with everyone to answer the questions, or you can take a day off. Scroll looked at Candle, Evelyn, and the others. "No matter what the final score is, you will be able to enjoy the delicious afternoon tea." "Phew," Evelyn patted her chest, turned her head and whispered, "I can't even recognize the words. I thought the ice cream would definitely be gone." Honey and Lotus very happily got up and saluted Scroll, then left the hall. In addition to Sylvie, who was not feeling well, didn't come, so only she and Evelyn were left among the Sleeping Island witches. "Do you want to stay?" Candle asked in a low voice. "I want to try," the other nodded. "Didn't His Royal Highness Roland say that knowledge can make my ability evolve? If I don't put more effort in this aspect, I'm afraid I will never be able to match them." She revealed a sly smile. "These days after class I have been practicing calligraphy in my room. Lily and Mystery Moon have also taught me how to read and write some commonly used words." Mentioning this, the frustration in her tone suddenly dispersed a lot, and her eyes became sparkling, which made Candle couldn't help but raise the corner of her mouth. Is that so? Then I will also try. Your Royal Highness, the results of this test have come out. Scroll handed the summary sheet to Roland. You've worked hard. The recent new discoveries in the North Slope mine made him puzzled, and it was even difficult to concentrate on his daily work, so he simply shifted his attention to something more relaxing. Hey, Nightingale's results actually passed? Yes, and her score is even among the top. Among them, she got a full score for the kingdom's language, Scroll said with a smile. After all, most of the questions you gave are very simple, and she already knows how to read and write, so compared to the witches who have to learn from the beginning, she is naturally much better. Tisk, Roland smacked his lips. I thought that this test would make her eat less sweets. Before his voice fell, he felt his shoulder being pinched hard. In short, the results look good. All the members of the Witch Union scored more than 60 points. It seems that your education is very effective. This is also inseparable from their efforts. Roland looked down. Only 2 witches from Sleeping Island participated in the test. Yes, among them, Evelyn scored 5 points, Candle 36 points. The latter should have a certain foundation. The majority of her points came from the kingdom's language, she replied. Only 2 weeks of lessons, they were already able to get points from the part of the test that wasn't written. The individual quality of the witches was really amazing, worthy of the continuous improvement of magic both internally and externally. His own witches were also equally outstanding, like Lily, Hummingbird, Mystery Moon and the others. They had only used 3 months to go from being illiterate to basically mastering reading and writing. This alone had surpassed most ordinary people. Chapter 276. Lucia carefully placed the 3 iron ingots on the bedroom floor, closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and reviewed all the experiences she had learned in the past in her mind. Then she stretched out her hands and released her ability to surround the target. This was the practice method that Anna had come up with for her. The 3 iron ingots were also specially made by Anna. Each of them contained different components, such as silver, copper, and lead, as well as some impurities. What she needed to do now was to reduce them to their elemental form while retaining the impurities, and find the iron ingot with the highest silver content. This meant that she had to control the output of her magic power and only operate on the target once. Otherwise, the impurities would be further disintegrated. This was also the reason why she felt that her ability was difficult to control when she was at home in Valencia. It was the same paper, but the products produced were completely different. This was because she did not understand the relationship between the amount of magic power and the effect of her ability, which led to the paper being continuously divided several times, and finally, most of the raw materials turned into water and gas. After coming to Border Town, the first lesson that the witches taught her was to control her magic power during practice. Lucia did not believe that something that could not be seen or touched could be accurately controlled until Anna demonstrated the length of the black fire on the spot. Only then did she realize how wrong she was. Anna could even change the size and thickness of the black fire by adjusting the output of magic power, and every time, she could do it accurately. Sister, are you practicing again? Belle curiously poked her head out of the bed. We just finished lunch. Lucia's hand shook, and the iron ingot suddenly turned into several puddles of powder. I told you not to disturb me when I'm using my ability. She turned around and knocked on her sister's head. Focus on your book. I don't understand. Belle pouted. I don't understand half of the words. I can't read and write like you. That's why you have to read more. Many words have similar structures. Even if you haven't seen them before, you should be able to guess their meaning. Literacy itself is a process of familiarizing yourself. Belle retracted her head. Lucia refocused on the second iron ingot and slowly controlled the outflow of magic power. In her mind, she imagined it as a thin layer of gauze, gently covering the target and wrapping it evenly. Hey, I'm here. The door was suddenly pushed open with a squeak, and a blonde woman flashed into the room. Hey, are you practicing your ability? Sister Nightingale. Belle let out a carefree cry. The second iron ingot turned into powder again. Lucia sighed and put all the metal scraps on the ground into her leather bag. She felt that she might not be able to practice at noon today. Here, this is for you. A stick of ice cream with a rich milky smell was placed in front of her. Thank you. Lucia took the ice cream. But isn't this only given out during afternoon tea? Nightingale patted her chest proudly and said, This is the reward I asked for from His Highness. By the way, you have a share too. Nightingale handed the other one to Belle, causing the little girl to burst into laughter. Sister Nightingale treats me the best. Lucia thought helplessly. This girl, once she has something delicious, she has forgotten about me. However, in the instant that the ice cream entered her mouth, she felt like if she were in her younger sister's shoes, her reaction would most likely be the same as Xiaoling's. The rich flavor of honey and milk melted in her mouth, and the cool and refreshing texture of the ice cream combined the two to further enhance the sweetness of the flavor. Even if she swallowed it, she could still feel a trace of coolness between her lips and teeth. No one could resist its delicious taste, especially in the hot summer. No wonder His Highness only gave out ice cream during afternoon tea on weekends. Such a unique style of food must be very expensive. At least, she had never heard of such a dessert in Valencia. Thinking of this, Lucia could not help but ask, How did you ask for it from His Highness? Nightingale curled up the corner of her mouth. I ranked third in the test, just behind Vendi and Leaf, but His Highness Roland thought that I couldn't pass. There was such a big deviation from the actual situation, so I naturally had to ask him for a reward. I see. She hesitated for a moment. Then what about me? 68 points. I don't know where I ranked. So low, Lucia said dejectedly. Out of a total of 120 points, she had only answered a little more than half of them correctly, and this was based on the fact that she was already literate. It's not bad. Nightingale patted her head. After all, you haven't been in class for a long time, so your math and natural science parts must be a little worse. If you have any questions, you can ask me. What about me? Can I ask? Belle raised her hand. Of course, Nightingale replied with a smile. You're welcome any time. When I pass the primary test, will I be able to choose my own job? It's still too early for you. His Highness said that the minimum age to work is 14. You're only 10 years old. What's the hurry? Lucia stared at her. The little girl did not want to be outdone. I also want to help you share your burden as soon as possible. Things like getting married and having children will cost a lot of money. If you don't have enough money, your life will be very hard. Who did you hear this from? Lucia asked with her hand on her forehead. Dad, he often nags that he won't be able to support us. Nightingale could not help but laugh. If you can work, where will you choose to go? The chemistry laboratory. Belle raised her hand. I want to become an alchemist and get the title of sage. I want to receive everyone's admiration and praise. It's better not to. She shook her head. The laboratory is actually very dangerous. Dangerous? The two sisters were surprised at the same time. Nightingale spread out her hands. Not only does it often deal with acid, but sometimes it also explodes. Even the chief alchemist can't avoid accidents. Last time, 4 of his fingers were blown off. If it weren't for Nana, I'm afraid that Mr. Kyle Sichi would never be able to pick up those bottles and cans again. She paused. Moreover, His Highness recently seems to be planning to develop a new kind of gunpowder. Even he thinks that this thing is extremely dangerous, so he needs to vacate a separate laboratory to prepare it. Well, in that case, do you have any good suggestions? Lucia hugged Belle and made up her mind. She would never let her sister work in such a terrible place. Of course, it's to enter the city hall and become a civil servant. Civil servant? She repeated. Ahem, this is what His Highness says when he talks to himself. In layman's terms, it's a city hall official. Nightingale coughed twice. It's stable and safe. The salary is above average, but the prospects are good. When I become a department head, the salary won't be lower than a witch's. I see, Lucia said thoughtfully. Sister Nightingale, do you like His Highness? Belle shouted. There are a lot of words in your words that His Highness said. Mom said that only people who they like very much will often talk about it. Her sister's question made Lucia's face stiffen. Damn it, how can this kind of thing be asked directly? It's too rude. Even ordinary friends can't be asked directly, not to mention that the other party is a senior that I respect. She hurriedly covered Belle's mouth. When she was about to apologize, she heard Nightingale frankly answer. Chapter 277. Genius 1 second. Remember, if you want to go? Say to Net, to provide you with wonderful novels to read. On the way to see His Royal Highness with the oar, Lucia's ears were still echoing with Nightingale's words. She had to say, she was shocked by the other party's calm attitude. Although she didn't understand the matter of feelings, but a witch and a prince, it was simply impossible for them to be together, right? In this way, shouldn't she carefully hide her own thoughts at the bottom of her heart, not letting the other party know? Moreover, why did she, as the audience, feel so embarrassed and flushed? Standing at the door of the office, Lucia took a deep breath, then pushed the door open and entered. Your Royal Highness, I brought the oar. Let me see, Roland said with a yawn. The ruler of Border Town looked the same as usual. With sleepy eyes, he should have just woken up from a nap. He leaned against the back of the chair, with a natural expression and an easygoing tone, completely unlike the other nobles who were fierce. Lucia's inexplicable nervousness also relaxed a lot. She took out the ore particles found in the North Slope mine from her leather bag and placed them on the desk one by one. After going through her ability to decompose, these particles looked almost the same. The color was either silver or gray. Probably only the knowledgeable His Royal Highness would be able to distinguish what kind of ore they were. She saw the prince frowning for a long time, weighing each of them in his palm, then carefully looking at the sunlight behind him. Finally, he waved his hand and said, Ahem, I will give these ores to Mr. Sichi to identify. You continue to go to the North Slope backyard to practice your ability. If you don't understand, you can ask Anna. Huh? Even His Royal Highness doesn't know? Lucia quickly bowed her head and said, yes. Just as she was about to leave the office, Roland stopped her again. Oh, right, your test results are good. You scored 68 points and ranked 9th. It's really not easy to have such a performance after learning with everyone for only a month. You have to keep it up. Also, he paused. In the next test, I hope Belle can also participate with everyone. Lucia replied excitedly. After watching the little girl happily bow and leave, Roland looked at the metal particles on the table and sighed. He was still too naive. He thought that by decomposing the rocks into elemental substances, he would be able to figure out what kind of mineral veins were hidden in the North Slope mine. However, the facts made him understand the huge gap between mechanical engineering and geology. These rocks would eventually be separated into 3 or 4 types of metals, and the ones with the most amount could be considered as ores of this type of metal. But their color and shape were almost the same. For example, iron, aluminum, magnesium, and potassium were all silver-white metals in their high-purity state. It was too difficult to distinguish them with the naked eye. Love, go, small, say, net chew. It was better to leave this problem to the chief alchemist. After all, using chemical reactions to verify the characteristics of the materials was much more reliable than making wild guesses. After dealing with this matter, Roland took out a piece of paper and began to plan how to deal with this year's months of the demons. Seeing that the summer was coming to an end, the 3 months of autumn were his last preparation time. In addition to resisting the invasion of the demonic beasts from the west, he also had to pay attention to Timothy and the church from the east. Compared to the previous year, when he was struggling to make ends meet, the population and income under his rule had increased significantly. The iron production was also gradually increasing, and there were more than a dozen witches. He was completely confident that he could turn the western region into an impassable iron wall. According to last year's combat experience, the biggest threat to the city wall was undoubtedly the hybrid demonic beasts. Especially when the enemy had a thick carapace that was difficult for bullets to penetrate, he could either use explosives or send witches out of the city to fight. Either way, the danger would be greatly increased. In addition, most of the enemies he faced were cavalry and infantry, so he had never seen the siege weapons of this era. If the other side could set up a torsion catapult, or a more advanced counterweight catapult, he was afraid that he would encounter a lot of trouble. After all, it was very inconvenient to load the cannon from the front and shoot downward. Every time he reloaded, he would need to raise the muzzle again, and the shells could easily roll out of the barrel. It was imperative to develop a more powerful artillery. Roland thought about it and listed the requirements he needed on the paper. First of all, it should have enough range and power to penetrate the carapace of the hybrid demonic beasts from a kilometer away. Second, it must be rear-loaded, able to freely adjust the angle of elevation, and also have the ability to fire quickly. Finally, in order to reduce the time of repeated research and development, the design should consider that one cannon could be used for multiple purposes. It could be used as a fixed battery to suppress the enemy, or it could be directly pulled to the ship and used as the main weapon of the future shallow water heavy gunboat. Therefore, it should be a heavy cannon with a large caliber and a long barrel. The first thing that came to Roland's mind was the 15 or 16-inch behemoth on the battleship, with a range of up to 10 kilometers, and a single shot could dig a few meters deep hole in the ground, but he quickly rejected this unrealistic idea. Although there was no problem with the processing, with the current level of materials in Border Town, at least 9 out of 10 cannons would explode. Even if the wall of the tube was thickened to more than 1 meter, it would still lose its practical value because it couldn't be moved. At present, he could only produce high-purity wrought iron and ordinary steel, so it was better to be conservative. In the end, Roland set the caliber at the sacred number of 152 millimeters. The cannon used a vertical wedge breech, similar to a sliding door. When it was lowered, the barrel was exposed and the shell was loaded. When it was repositioned, it was locked, and the gunpowder gas erupted forward. Compared with the screw breech and the horizontal wedge breech, it had the fastest firing speed, and the principle was very simple. He had already memorized its mechanical structure. However, in order to achieve a fast firing speed, the cannon had to be equipped with a recoil mechanism. Simply put, it was like 2 pumps, one filled with oil, and the other with a recoil spring or gas. When the muzzle was recoiled, the 2 connecting rods were pulled, and at the same time, the oil and the recoil spring were compressed. The oil was used to cushion the recoil, and the recoil spring was used to store power. After the firing, the barrel would be pushed back to its original position. Finally, it was the cannonball. Now that he had used the sacred cannon, he naturally couldn't be satisfied with the clumsy solid iron ball and paper-wrapped canister shooting. So, for the sake of security, Roland decided to develop 2 kinds of fixed shells at the same time. One was an enlarged version of the bullet, with a solid metal warhead, and the other was an explosive warhead with a trigger fuse, which was later known as the howitzer. After all, the latter had a certain technical difficulty. It was necessary to repeatedly test the reliability of the fuse, and it was impossible to guarantee that it would be ready for the army before the months of the demons. Therefore, it was necessary to first produce the former to solve the problem. Even if it was a solid warhead, it would be easy to deal with the slow-moving, thick-armored demonic beasts and the stationary siege equipment. Of course, no matter what kind of shell it was, it would consume a lot of smokeless gunpowder. Before the 2 acids could be mass-produced, the new cannon could only be used as a special weapon. It was impossible to achieve a hardy artillery coverage. At this moment, a guard pushed open the door and came in. "Your Highness, there is a secret letter from King's City." Roland put down the quill and opened the envelope. From beginning to end, the letter had no signature, and the handwriting was very unfamiliar, but the content of the first sentence showed that this letter was undoubtedly sent by Theo. Today, a team of about 1,000 people will leave King's City, heading in the direction of the Western Territory. To be continued. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 278. Longsong Stronghold, Theater Performance Hall. With the continuous whistles and cheers of the audience, the curtains slowly fell. May wiped the sweat from her forehead and looked at Irene, who was looking at her with excitement and expectation, and nodded slightly. This affirmation made Irene cheer out loud. When the curtain fell, she couldn't help but rush forward and hug May. "Haha, I really did a good job." So annoying, May rolled her eyes and pushed her away. You've made some progress, you can go on stage alone. Miss May, then, what about me? Rosia, another witch, asked cautiously. You're still far from it, she said without hesitation. Your expression is stiff, your movements are slow, your lines are not emotional, you made 2 mistakes in the 2nd act, and 1 mistake in the 4th act. This is a typical case of not memorizing the script. Miss May is really strict, Gate touched the back of his head and said, but the audience's response seems to be very good. Listen, the applause hasn't subsided yet. Most of these people are civilians who have never been to the theater. The play is a new thing for them, May said bluntly. If it was a normal performance, those few mistakes would be enough to make the nobles boo. She paused. If you want to go on the road of being an actor, don't be satisfied with temporary success. Only by constantly improving yourself can you stand firm on the stage. Yes, thank you for your guidance. Everyone bowed their heads in unison. May sighed. Here they go again. I obviously can't be regarded as a drama mentor for this group of people. But she was too lazy to care about such trivial things. Well, continue to work hard. The Witch Diary is scheduled until September. We still have several rounds to perform. This is a rare opportunity, don't miss it. Yes. A month ago, May received a notice from the Ministry of Education that all the members of the cast should go to Longsong Stronghold to perform. The so-called members were the miscellaneous actors who had followed her to the border, plus Irene Eltek. Perhaps His Royal Highness and his agent, Perot, had reached an agreement. The theater had specifically cleared out a series of vacancies for the crew to perform the Diary of a Witch trilogy. Therefore, this group of amateur actors who were not even considered as rookies openly stepped onto the big stage of the Fortress Theater. Usually, it was unlikely that they would be chosen even if they appeared in a supporting role. But now, they appeared on stage as important characters, and they even performed hand in hand with the star of the Western region. One could not help but sigh at the fickleness of fate. Back at the backstage, May could not help but frown. They saw a group of people making a racket in the lounge, as if they were arguing about something. When they saw May and her group appear, more than 10 people surrounded them under the lead of a woman. These people were all actors of the theater, and May also knew the woman who was leading them. Her name was Bella Dean, and she was a famous actress who belonged to a different crew than herself. Some nobles had once thought that she was the biggest competitor for the star of the Western region, but in fact, whether it was acting or reputation, she had always firmly surpassed her. Guess what I saw? Bella bypassed May and walked step by step to the front of Irene. A group of lousy actors who sneaked back from a small place in the countryside. What did you say? Irene asked with a puzzled face. Gate, Rosia, and the others' faces stiffened, and they could not help but take 2 steps back. Bella covered her mouth and said, "Look, she still doesn't know her own identity." These words aroused a burst of laughter from the crowd. Then I'll be frank with you, Longsong Stronghold is a big city that simply isn't a place you should come to, and the Stronghold Theater also doesn't welcome this kind of inferior and vulgar third-rate performance. What Diary of a Witch? It's nothing more than the struggles and howls of a few stray dogs. Who would be interested in watching this kind of disgusting play? It would be better for you to roll back to Border Town as soon as possible. You? Irene suddenly blushed. What do you mean by third-rate performance? Didn't you hear the applause of the audience? The audience? Bella sneered disdainfully. You call those people who deal with mud, hose, and furnaces every day an audience? Don't laugh my teeth off. Even if you caught a few monkeys for a stroll, they would still cheer loudly, okay? If it weren't for the free tickets, would they have the spare money to watch your performance? Irene opened her mouth, but did not know how to refute. In order to arrange for your 3 performances every week, the theater's income has continuously dropped, and even we have been affected. As long as your play is arranged together, the nobles will not come to see it. Bella raised her voice. Who would be willing to sit in a chair full of mud and oil? If it were me, I would also not want to step into a messy theater after a group of country bumpkins have a carnival. The other side is obviously looking for trouble, May thought. The sudden insertion of the small towns cast has indeed squeezed out many opportunities, but Belladine has not been affected too much. According to the news from some acquaintances, after she left Longsong Stronghold, the theater intended to make her the new star of the Western region, so it was naturally impossible to cancel the play she starred in. So, the purpose of Bella's action was very obvious. She seemed to be scolding Irene and the others, but in fact she was targeting herself. If these people backed down, she would not be able to play the Diary of a Witch alone, and could only return to Border Town dejectedly. In this way, she would be equal to defeating herself in a head-on confrontation, and at the same time restore the opportunities of other actors, so her prestige would inevitably rise, and thus establish the position of the new generation of star of the Western region. But she would never let herself become a stepping stone for others. The theater's income has dropped. Are you serious? May turned around and casually said, because of the exemption of tickets, the theater can't make ends meet. How could you come up with such a naive conclusion? The theater operator has undoubtedly reached an agreement with His Highness the Prince and His Excellency Perot, so the shortfall will naturally be covered by Border Town City Hall. This is a business contract, not a game. You really should use your brain instead of shouting here based on your imagination. You? What nonsense are you talking about? In addition, it's only you, a group of inferior actors with low acting skills, that's all. She smiled slightly. I have performed in King's City's Ablon Theater, which is an open-air theater. On the day of the performance, it happened to be raining, but the nobles still filled all the seats. So, you say that because of the commoners, they are unwilling to come to watch the performance? No, they just don't like to specially come to watch a group of monkeys perform. The scene fell into a strange silence. Not only did no one stand up to accuse her, no one even tried to defend themselves. Finally, you said that The Witch Diary is inferior and vulgar, and that it is the struggle and wail of a stray dog? May raised the corner of her mouth, but her voice was extremely cold. I may have forgotten to tell you, but the script of this story was written by His Highness the Prince. Do you want to say that His Highness's idea is inferior and vulgar? Insulting the royal family and nobles is punishable by cutting off the tongue. Now, do you still intend to stick to your point of view? She looked at the crowd behind Bella. Or perhaps some of you want to try. Under her gaze, more than 10 actors stepped back one after another. Enough. Bella gritted her teeth. Since you went to Border Town, you shouldn't have come back. Do you think I don't know, May? The reason why you went to that broken place was not to see that idiot Irene, but for daybreak. Slap. Her voice stopped abruptly, and a bright red palm print appeared on her left cheek. Bella touched her face in disbelief. You dare to hit? Phew, I was too impulsive. May took a deep breath. In this way, I may encounter some trouble. Sure enough, the two actors behind Bella walked out. Miss May, what you did is a bit too much. Don't you know the importance of an actor's appearance? I think you should at least apologize to her. Apologize? Doesn't that prove that I did something wrong? May sneered at the bottom of her heart. Although she was impulsive, she didn't think that she needed to apologize at all. She looked at the two men with a gloomy face, and couldn't help but think of what Carter Lannis had said. Men may be strong, but they also have many weaknesses. If their eyes and throat are attacked, they will instantly lose their resistance, and of course, there is also the area between their legs. As long as you are agile and decisive, it is not impossible to knock down a man who is much stronger than you. Although she didn't know how she talked to him about this, she was ready to kick them. She just needed to wait for the two men to come a little closer. At this moment, the lounge door was violently pushed open, and an armored knight walked in, followed by several warriors with long spears. When they entered the room, they had already pointed their spears at the crowd. I heard that someone here is slandering His Highness Roland and plotting against His Highness crew. Chapter 279. The conflict ended very quickly. Seeing the fierce knight, no one dared to say another word. Most of the actors were fence-sitters, otherwise there would not have been a dispute at the beginning. In the face of the famous May, not everyone had the courage to stand up against her. Now the situation had become even more one-sided. Bella was directly taken out of the lounge by two men. After a while, only Carter and the border town crew members were left in the large room. "Thank you so much for your help," Gate and the others bowed. "You're really amazing." You forced her to speechless in 2 or 3 hits. Irene held May's hand and exclaimed, "And that slap, it completely stunned her." Then she turned to the chief knight and saluted. "Sir Carter, how come you are in Long Song Stronghold? I'm also very curious about that." May shrugged, but her heart was relieved. "Because of His Highness's order." Carter spread out his hands. "Can I buy you a drink?" "This is where you live?" The chief knight looked around cautiously. "Well, it's very ordinary, right?" May took out a bottle of white wine from the cupboard and poured him a small cup. "The pub only opens at night. This is my treat." Irene and the others slipped away quickly. On the way, they suddenly remembered something. Finally, when they returned to the residence, only she and Carter were left. "Well, indeed, quite ordinary." Carter coughed twice. "I don't know your family. My mother died a long time ago. I found a job for my father in the theater. It's all easy chores," May said calmly. "But I think he will come back at night." This small bungalow was located in a deep alley in the inner city. It was bought with all her savings after she became the star of the Western region. Although the house was small and old, moving away from the outer city would at least prevent her from being harassed and spied on. Sorry. Nothing." May also poured herself a small cup. "Did His Highness send you here to rectify the order of the theater and solve the dispute among the actors?" "No, of course not." Carter repeatedly waved his hands and said, "Timothy has sent people to cause trouble in the Western Territory again. His Highness Roland is on the way here with the main army. I just took the little town and arrived first. I arranged for the second army to strengthen the night watch, and while I was at it, let the Honeysuckle family be more vigilant, in order to prevent any sneak attacks on the city gate and so on." "You shouldn't have told me these things." May was startled and then shook her head. "You asked, and it's not a secret operation." Carter gulped down the wine. "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing." "All right," she said, pursing her lips. "So how did you get into the theater?" "After I handed over the task, I suddenly saw the advertisement for the play you acted in, so I wanted to see what you would look like on the real stage. The result was just as I imagined. Although I only saw the end, your performance was really wonderful." The knight exclaimed, "So I went backstage to invite you for a drink, but I didn't know whether I should go in or not, so I lingered at the door for a while until I heard the argument inside. You've been outside for a long time?" May frowned. "I didn't mean to eavesdrop." Carter raised his hands. "It was just an accident, I promise." She couldn't help but chuckle. "I didn't blame you, you don't have to look like that." "Is that so?" The knight breathed a sigh of relief and reached for the wine, but she slapped his hand down. "You still have a task tonight, right?" May shook her finger. "So you can only drink a small cup? No more." She smiled. "When this mission is over, you can treat me properly." After Carter left, May filled her glass again, leaned back in the chair, and sipped. Since the last time she tasted the white wine, she found that she gradually liked this hot and mellow taste. As for Carter's previous invitation, she already had a vague answer in her heart. Some things could only be known after trying, just like the white wine in her hand. Although it was hard to swallow at first, the mellow taste was not something that sweet and sour fruit wine or bland ale could compare to. "Why don't I bring my father back to town and settle down after this play is over?" 2 days later, Roland arrived at Long Song Stronghold. Perot Hull and the members of the 5 families went out of the city to welcome His Royal Highness troops. After the first army was stationed in Long Song Stronghold, Roland went straight to the castle and held a brief meeting. "I've received reliable news that Timothy has sent an army to Long Song Stronghold." He sat in the main seat of the hall, looking down at the nobles below. "I don't know their number and route, but there's no doubt that they're coming for me. According to Timothy's usual style, they're bound to expand their troops by kidnapping civilians, and then use drugs to force these people to attack." "Excuse me, Your Highness," Viscount Eric of the Wolf family was puzzled. The drug you're talking about is? It's an evil red pill that can make civilians more powerful than a knight, but after the effect is over, the people who take it can only struggle helplessly to death. Except for Perrault, the other 4 families didn't know about the church's secret drug, so Roland simply explained its characteristics and origin. Timothy intends to use this method to continuously weaken the resistance of the Western region. Any population he doesn't need will be the target of kidnapping, and your territories are also included in this list. As the guardian of the Western region, I ask you to move all your family members and territory civilians into the city so as not to expand Timothy's troops. But the food and stored goods in our warehouse, move as much as you can, Roland resolutely interrupted. I'll only give you 3 days. The surrounding civilians must gather in Longsong stronghold. After I've repelled Timothy's troops, I'll naturally let you go. After the meeting, the prince summoned Iron Axe into the castle. In fact, he didn't reveal the true situation to the nobles. Under the carpet investigation of Lightning and Maggie, the team from King City had already been exposed. Unlike the previous group of invaders, they were riding a single-masted sailboat and were heading west along the main Redwater River, passing through Willow Town to enter the hinterland of the western region. This was a very tricky route. When the enemy crossed the fork, they could either turn back along the tributary to attack the south and east gates of Longsong stronghold, or continue westward to Border Town. In order to avoid splitting his troops to defend, he had to take the initiative to concentrate his superior forces and defeat the enemy at one point. Chapter 280. After entering the hall, Iron Axe performed a standard military salute. Timothy's troops are expected to arrive at the fork of the Redwater River in 4 days, so the First Army will set off this afternoon, Roland straightforwardly ordered. The troops stationed in Border Town will meet with you at the location where the attack will take place. I will also rush over as soon as possible. Doesn't Border Town need to be defended? All the enemy's movements are under the surveillance of Lightning and Maggie, so there is no need to divide the troops to defend. We just need to go to one place and defeat them. The prince paused. And Longsong's stronghold needs to leave 100 people to guard the nobles. Stay here. Iron Axe was slightly startled. Roland briefly explained the previous orders issued to the 5 families. The reason why I gathered them is to make it convenient for them to guard. After knowing that Timothy is attacking the western region, I can't guarantee that someone will have any ideas. The Second Army's weapons are old and they lack combat experience, so they may not be able to react in time. But with the addition of 10 teams of First Army soldiers, we can ensure that they won't be able to stir up any trouble. I don't want any trouble to happen while we are fighting at the fork of the Redwater River. Yes, Your Highness, he replied. Are you going too? After Iron Axe left, Nightingale appeared from behind the main seat. Of course, Roland said, if I don't go, who else can use Lotus's ability? I may not be good at commanding, but blocking the road with a bunker and slapping the face with a tank, those are my unique skills. I know about the bunker, but what is a tank? Nightingale looked confused. Well, it's a carriage that drags the artillery, the prince coughed twice. But we don't have enough horses, so the artillery needs to be transported by Little Town, so it can't be called a tank. Is that why you chose Honey? She blinked. As far as I know, she can tame tigers and leopards to be as docile as horses. But can a cannon pulled by a beast also be called a tank? Of course, Roland couldn't help but raise the corner of his mouth. It can also be called a tiger or a leopard. Just then, Carter came in with a white-tailed kite in his arms. Your Highness, there is news from Border Town. Roland clapped his hands, and the white-tailed kite spread its wings as if it had a mind of its own, broke free from the knight's arms, and soared into the sky. After gliding for a distance, it landed steadily on his shoulder. He took out a piece of jerky from his pocket and asked the bird to swallow it. The bird even raised one of its claws so that he could untie the cloth. This eagle was not Maggie, but one of the air messengers trained by Honey. They could remember 5 to 6 different people and hundreds of flight routes. As long as they were brought to an unfamiliar place, they would be able to establish a connection with the homing nest. This time, Roland brought a total of 4 messengers to the fortress. They could travel back and forth within 2 hours and fly for an entire day without stopping. In a situation where there was no radio, this was the fastest way to communicate. Roland spread out the letter wrapped in a cloth and quickly skimmed through it. The sender was Vendi. According to his request, she had taken Lotus, Sylvie, Leaf, Hummingbird, and Nana to the fork of the Redwater River. Along with the ship were some members of the artillery team and 8 cannons. This was also the maximum number of cannons that could be accommodated on the deck of Little Town. The prince estimated that when Vendi pushed the sail forward at full speed, it would take a day for the cement ship to reach its destination. Although Sylvie acted as a navigator and the ship could travel at night, Vendi's magic power was far less abundant than Anna's, so it was impossible for her to continuously use her ability. So if they rested at night and transported during the day, they could only make 2 round trips in 4 days. At most, they could transport 16 field cannons to the fork of the river. Although the number of cannons was less than in the last battle, considering the surprise attack and the fact that the other side could not quickly launch a counterattack, the artillery was barely enough. Roland took the pen and paper handed over by Nightingale and wrote down new instructions. He ordered the garrison troops to carry weapons and ammunition and immediately set off, converging with Iron Axe's main force at the fork of the river. It would only take half an hour for the white-tailed kite to deliver the letter to Scroll, who would then pass it on to Captain Brian. When Roland arrived at the scheduled location, it was already the next morning. The sparkling river was exactly here, divided into 2, one flowing towards Long Song Stronghold and the other connecting to Redwater City. Because the latter river was wider, people used to regard it as the main channel of the Redwater River, while the one leading to Long Song Stronghold was called Little Redwater. After disembarking, the witches who had been waiting for a long time by the river came to greet them. "Where is Vendi?" Roland looked around and asked. "She returned by Little Town at dawn," Leaf said. "She said that there is still a batch of artillery to be delivered." "I heard that you want to deal with Timothy Wimbledon, the false king who hunts witches in the city every day?" Lotus asked impatiently. "What do you want us to do?" Although Iron Axe and the main force of the First Army had not yet arrived, but the preparation work could be carried out in advance, as long as there were witches. "I need to establish a line of defense on both sides of the main river." He squatted down and drew a simple diagram with a stone. "If this line represents the enemy's route of advance, then my troops will be distributed on both sides, and will suddenly launch a pincer attack. In order to achieve the effect of surprise, they must first hide. Therefore, you have to raise 2 mud houses on the shore, forming a V-shaped angle. The houses should be long, the walls must be thick, and the inside should be divided into 8 compartments, leaving only a small window on the side facing the Redwater River." "Your Highness, I don't quite understand." Lotus was puzzled. "You can hide the soldiers in the mud houses to hide their whereabouts, but they also can't attack the ships on the river. What if the false king's fleet doesn't stop, nor does it reach the shore, and continues to sail all the way?" "No, they can't pass," Roland smiled. "You will know when the time comes." Then he looked at Leaf. "You are responsible for covering these fortifications. Weeds and vines will do. Make them look more natural." "Yes," Leaf replied. In this way, when the artillery was pushed into the camouflaged fortifications, the 2 mud houses, which seemed useless in Lotus' eyes, would instantly transform into unsinkable sailing battleships. At that time, as long as the baffles on the windows were opened, each compartment would be able to spit out a deadly flame, and the 16 field artillery would not lose their aim because of the turbulence. In fact, at such a close range, they could almost hit the sailing ships sailing in the middle of the river with their eyes closed, and even if they couldn't sink them, it would be enough to turn their decks into a Shura battlefield. Chapter 281. The enemy fleet approached the fork of the Redwater River half a day later than expected, and it wasn't until the afternoon of the 4th day that the 10 sailboats slowly appeared at the edge of their field of vision. Vanda, who had received the news, passed through the 6 compartments in turn, gave the gunner group in charge of him the order to prepare, and then returned to his own gun position. "Where are the enemies?" Rodney opened a slit in the window baffle and looked outside. They are at least a few hundred meters away from us. Cat's Claw, who was responsible for observing the signal flags, muttered while leaning against the skylight. I can't even see their shadows from here. There are too many weeds on the roof. In addition to the shooting window in each compartment, there was also a hole at the top of the wall. After climbing up 2 steps of the stairs, they could easily see the situation on the Redwater River. Speaking of weeds, the ability of the green-haired witch is simply incredible, Jop said while wiping some rusty shells. Wherever she goes, the thin grass will grow wildly like hair, covering the bunkers so tightly that they look no different from ordinary mounds of earth. What green-haired witch? Venner scolded. That's Miss Leaf. The first time we fought against the Duke's Night Regiment, she helped us bury vines in the woods on both sides, making it impossible for the knight to take a detour. Otherwise, that group of tin cans would have to go through the woods to get behind us, and that would be enough to make us suffer. If you want to compare magical abilities, which is more ordinary? Rodney shrugged. In one night she can build a bunker, cover the ground with vines and weeds, fly freely in the sky, and even transform into a giant pigeon. All of these things are not achievable by mortals. The most magical one is Miss Nana, Cat's Claw said in a tone full of longing and expectation. I don't know if I will be honorably wounded this time. If I am wounded, I will be able to see her up close. Maybe I will even be able to hear her comfort. Pay attention to the enemy's situation. Vander frowned and shouted, if you dare to talk nonsense again, I will punish you to go back and clean the toilet. Cat's Claw stuck out his tongue and stretched his body out again. The artillery captain sighed in his heart. These guys had lost their nervousness and were no longer trembling like they were a few months ago when they first arrived on the battlefield. He couldn't tell whether this change was good or bad. He always felt that he had underestimated his opponents too much, but he also couldn't severely reprimand his men, because he was also not much better. Since becoming a soldier of His Highness, Vanner's understanding of fighting had undergone earth-shaking changes. Bloody and cruel fighting seemed to have nothing to do with strength, skill, or courage. They only needed to repeat the steps that they had memorized during training, prepare according to the rules, meet the enemy according to the rules, and open fire according to the rules to win. This was especially true when the town fought against the new king's militia. Even though the opponent was a humanoid beast with astonishing strength and was not afraid of death, the battle only lasted for an hour. Only when he was cleaning up the battlefield did he realize that he did not feel the slightest bit tired. It was as if he had just done a warm-up before training, and the enemy had already been defeated. If this continued, would there be a day when they couldn't even see the enemy's face? Would they be able to annihilate the enemy thousands of miles away just by operating these metal machines? Just as Vanner's imagination was running wild, the cat's paw's warning sound pulled him back to reality. I can see the enemy. Load the ammunition. Vanner shook his head, threw the distracting thoughts to the back of his mind, and ordered in a deep voice. The people in the compartments suddenly became busy. They had practiced this step so many times that now they could put the ammunition and shells into the gun chamber even with their eyes closed. In the case that they didn't need to think about resetting and adjusting the angle of fire, the gun group could fire once every 20 breaths. Vanner had already memorized the battle plan arranged by His Highness Roland and Sir Ironaxe. It was similar to the defensive battle in Border Town. Only when the observer saw Miss Lightning's red flag could he push down the camouflage baffle in front of the gun window and open fire. The first and second gun groups, which were closest to the river bank, swept the deck with shotguns, while the rest of the gun groups bombarded the cabins with solid shells. He quietly waited for the arrival of the red signal flag. Now, even without the telescope, Lotus could see that the fleet of the fake king was approaching the ambush point little by little. Compared with the 3-masted or 4-masted sailboats sailing on the sea, these boats were obviously much slimmer. They didn't have high sides and fences, and their low hulls at first glance looked like they were sticking to the river. In addition to the bulging sails, there was also a row of sailors sitting on both sides of the deck, slowly pushing the oars in their hands. Until now, His Highness still hadn't issued any orders. She couldn't help but feel a little anxious. The observation point was set up at the top of a relatively high hillside. Although it could overlook the whole battlefield, it was also far away from the river. Now that Lightning and Maggie weren't with His Highness, considering the time it would take for the messenger to transmit the order to the various squads, she was afraid that it would be too late to stop the fleet from passing through the fork of the Redwater River. Seeing that the first sailboat was about to pass through the mud house, Lotus couldn't help but want to ask, but suddenly there was a loud rumble that rolled across the river. As if it was an attack signal, more than a dozen thick smoke mixed with fire spewed out from the mud house, and the dull sound of thunder continued without end. What the hell happened? Lotus turned her eyes back to the river, and then almost couldn't believe her eyes. She didn't see any knight or mercenaries fighting, but on the deck of the first sailboat it seemed as if it had suddenly exploded. Splinters of wood and broken limbs splashed everywhere, and more than half of the sailors who were rowing the oars were instantly killed or injured. Clouds of blood rose up, dyeing the deck scarlet. After losing half of its power, the forward speed of the ship quickly slowed down, but the roar didn't stop in the slightest. Not long after, the tall mast in the middle of the hull was cut in half by a group of black shadows, and after swaying twice, it loudly fell to the ground, smashing two knights who had just climbed out of the cabin onto the deck. The sailboat, pushed by the current, began to slowly retreat, and the other boats had to disperse to avoid it. Many people heard the movement and came out of the cabin, looking blankly at the leading sailboat that had already turned into hell, looking somewhat at a loss. Then a terrible blow fell on the second sailboat. The crowded deck made the blood fog even more turbulent, and Lotus could see that after the rolling thunder, there were several bright red open spaces among the enemies that were originally close to each other, and the unlucky people standing in those open spaces were broken into several pieces. Some people still hadn't died, and were dragging their intestines out as they wailed in pain. Others who were lucky enough to survive jumped into the river one after another to escape, no longer willing to stay on this terrible deck for another moment. Chapter 282. Compared to Lotus, who was watching from afar, Sylvie could see more clearly. Through the walls of the mud hut, she could see the soldiers working in an orderly manner. Each person was doing a single repetitive action, but when 7 or 8 people were linked together, it became a complex whole. The paper bags and iron balls piled up in the back of the compartment were continuously sent into the thick iron pipe, and then erupted with the power of thunder. Upon closer inspection, Sylvie noticed that the soldiers first ignited a rope at the end of the iron pipe. The jumping sparks penetrated the inside of the iron pipe, igniting the first paper bag. The next moment of light made her unable to help but squint her eyes. The sparks quickly expanded into an orange-red fireball, filling every pore in the pipe. The expanding flame had nowhere to go, so it wrapped around the iron ball and rushed outwards, as if a giant hand was forcefully throwing it out. In the blink of an eye, the iron ball turned into a black shadow and went straight towards the sailboat in the river. Its strength was so great that it directly drilled a fist-sized hole in the wooden planks of the ship. Although its speed slowed down a lot after penetrating the planks, its power was still not to be underestimated. An enemy who was trying to climb out of the cabin was hit in the waist and immediately split in two. This was the first time that Sylvie had seen such a scene. There was no need for a sharp blade or sword, just a small round ball could split a person in two. Because her line of sight was too close, she even felt that the blood and internal organs of the dead had splashed onto her body. Then, several people were hit by the iron ball, either having their limbs cut off or their heads smashed. For a time, the cabin was filled with flowing blood and red and white internal organs. The witch suddenly felt her stomach churn, and a stream of acid rushed straight to her throat. The scene in the cabin suddenly disappeared, and her chaotic thoughts were no longer able to maintain the use of her ability. Sylvie was forced to cut off the connection with the Eye of Truth, bowed her head and vomited. "What's wrong?" Lotus, who was startled, immediately came forward to support her. "Are you okay?" His Royal Highness also noticed her discomfort and handed her a handkerchief. "If you think it's bloody, then don't look at it, at least don't use your ability to look at it from a close distance. Take a rest first." "Thank you." Sylvie took the handkerchief and wiped her mouth. "I'm fine." This was probably the incredible invention that Maggie and Lightning had talked about. But at that time, no one really paid much attention to it. After all, it was difficult to imagine such a shocking weapon in one's mind without seeing it with one's own eyes. She looked back at the battlefield and saw that Timothy's fleet had begun to approach the shore. Apparently, they had also noticed that this storm-like attack came from behind the low houses on the shore that were disguised as earth slopes. However, they didn't know that Prince Roland had set up far more fortifications than just this one. Rather far away from the V-shaped defensive line was a bunker covered in weeds and vines. The distance between the two was exactly the same as the length of the fleet. Unless they didn't hesitate to turn the ship around and retreat, they would only fall into a pincer attack if they landed at any point. The soldiers in the bunker also held a long, round iron pole. What they shot out was no longer a round iron ball, but a sharp, tailless arrow. They didn't look as unstoppable as the iron ball, but their target had changed to the naked flesh and blood. Sylvie guessed that the enemy probably wanted to wait until they got ashore to regroup before launching a counterattack. But the soldiers in the bunker didn't give them this opportunity. Just like before, they didn't even need to show their heads. They just needed to aim their weapons at the target and pull the trigger easily. Then, the arrows would rain down on the enemy. In the face of this kind of rapid firing and needless weapon, the enemy didn't last long before they all collapsed. Those who got off the ship wanted to get back on board, while those who stood on the side of the ship waiting to get off the ship fled in all directions. The hull swayed dramatically, and the gangplank overturned into the water. Many people who fell into the water were killed while climbing the ship's side. The scene was chaotic. It's time. Until then, the prince put down the telescope and ordered Iron Axe. Take the reserve team to clean up the battlefield. If their leader knight is lucky enough to survive, try to catch him alive. I want to ask them some questions. Yes, the latter saluted. Then he looked at Sylvie. You go with Iron Axe. Don't let anyone slip away. Sylvie nodded and followed the commander of the First Army out of the observation post. She suddenly understood why His Highness Roland dared to openly shelter the witches in this corner of the continent. With such a powerful force, even if the church dispatched the God's Punishment Army, they might not be able to defeat him easily. If Lady Tilly could also have such a weapon, the witches might really be able to return home one day. Looking at the paralyzed sailboat on the riverbank, Roland was slightly relieved. When they planned to land and counterattack, they were basically doomed to lose. It was a very slow process to turn the bow of the ship with the poles and oarsmen. This was probably the reason why the enemy didn't choose to turn around and retreat under the artillery attack. Rather than being beaten in vain, it was better to quickly dock and organize a team to counterattack. It was very difficult to sink a wooden sailboat with the solid iron ball of a 12-pound field artillery. Even if the hull was riddled with holes, it wouldn't affect it to continue to float on the water. Therefore, turning the bow of the ship might cause serious losses, but there would always be one or two sailboats that could escape. But if they chose to land, they would only end up being annihilated. Compared to the last surprise attack on the stronghold and the defense of the town, this time the enemy didn't even have an effective attack. It was probably because the pills were usually controlled by the commander and were only distributed to the militia before the battle. Once they encountered an ambush, they simply couldn't respond quickly. It wasn't until the evening that the cleanup of the battlefield came to an end. Iron Axe and the guards walked into the camp with the two captives. Before Roland had time to open his mouth to ask, one of them had already shouted, "I am Sir Snacker, Your Highness. Please allow me to write a letter to my family. They will certainly send a generous ransom." "I am the second son of the Northern Shield family, Irvin Shepherd, Your Highness," the other person said. "I am also willing to pay the ransom." "So, this attack was led by you?" Roland raised his eyebrows. No, the leader was Sir Vincent, but he has already been killed." Sir Snacker twisted his body. "Your Highness, can you let your people untie my hands? During the redemption period, I hope to receive normal treatment." "I don't need a ransom," the prince shook his head. "Your purpose in coming to the Western Territory, your plan, and Timothy's plan, tell me everything you know, and I may give you the treatment you deserve." Please forgive me for not being able to tell you," Snacker said after a moment of hesitation. "I have already pledged allegiance to His Majesty Timothy, the young knight of the Shield family also refused. Doing so would violate my oath. Is that so? Roland said disapprovingly. Take them away first. After the guards left, he glanced at Iron Axe. I heard that you served as the guard of the Patriarch in Iron Sand City, and are very good at interrogating information? Yes, Your Highness, Iron Axe replied. There are very few people who can hide information from me. Very well, I will leave these two to you to interrogate. Roland turned around. There are no restrictions on the methods, as long as you can get enough information. He was startled. What about the ransom? I said from the beginning, I don't need a ransom, Roland said coldly. After the interrogation, treat it as if they were killed. Chapter 283. On the second day after returning to Border Town Castle, Iron Axe brought back all the information he had obtained from the interrogation. These people are just Timothy's advance troops? Roland asked with a frown. Indeed, Your Highness, Iron Axe nodded. As you have guessed before, sending one militia after another to attack the Western Territory is Timothy Wimbledon's strategy. In addition to the Western Territory, he also used the same method to deal with Garcia Wimbledon in the port of Clearwater. Are they all civilians? Not all of them. There are criminals, rats, and most of them are refugees from all over the world. He replied. According to the enemy knight, after Timothy forcibly recruited these people, he first used some verbal promises to stabilize them, and then they took the first batch of pills. In this way, they had no choice but to be controlled by Timothy, wanting more pills to relieve their pain and desire. But they didn't know that once they swallowed the pills, there was no possibility of treatment. Roland sighed deeply. Taking more pills would only delay their death. Yes, Your Highness. Timothy didn't tell the militia about the side effects of the pills. They thought that after fighting for the new king, they would be able to get the status and rewards he promised. What is the purpose of this team? Roland asked. Border Town, Iron Axe quickly replied. Because Sir Vincent, who had already died, thought that the town had no walls, it would be easier to achieve the goal of a war of attrition. He estimated that 1,000 militia who took the pills could be exchanged for about 3,000 casualties, which would be a heavy blow to Border Town. But what? Snacker also confessed that Timothy gave them another task, which was to divide the militia into several batches to attack the town, ensuring their own safety while observing your response and combat effectiveness. I think he should have noticed the problem of the knight who didn't return during the last attack. This time, no one returned, the prince shrugged. Since they are the advance troops for attrition, do these two know Timothy's follow-up attack plan? They don't know much, but the scale will be much larger than the previous two attacks. Roland's heart was suddenly filled with hatred. These were all living laborers, yet they were being used as cannon fodder in waves? Even if he defeated the enemy unscathed, it would still be a Pyrrhic victory. Compared to resisting Timothy's invasion, it was more important for him to stop this meaningless war. Otherwise, after he unified Grey Castle, how long would it take for the population to flourish again? After the arrival of the months of the demons, the entire land route of the Western Territory will be covered with snow, and it will be difficult for large troops to move even an inch. If we rely on ships, the queue will be very long, not to mention the huge cost, but also easy to be intercepted halfway. He said, so if he wants to launch this attack this year, he has to do it before the winter snow comes. We have to recruit the people even earlier, at least before winter. Do you intend to? Roland closed his eyes and thought for a moment before saying, I want to delay this war. Send an emissary or send a diplomatic letter to him. I'm afraid Timothy Wimbledon won't do as you wish, Iron Axe said in a deep voice. No, that won't be very useful, he said slowly. If we want him to give up the idea of attacking, we have to first reduce the number of people he can recruit, and second, make him realize that a war of attrition is meaningless, and make him afraid of the Western Territory. I originally planned to let Barov arrange for his men to spread the news of the Western Territory's development, attracting the poor people outside the city to go there, but now it seems that the effect is too slow, and the measures are too conservative. If we want to take the people away before Timothy, we have to take the initiative to contact and recruit them, just like the last time we went to King's City. The most important thing is the southern territory, which has been repeatedly hit by war, followed by the northern kingdom, which will probably require the first army to carry out. If it's just recruitment, a squad of 50 people will be enough, Iron Axe said without hesitation. After all, we won't be operating near the city, so we don't have to worry about confronting the enemy. I'll discuss the specific plan with you in detail after I've thought about it, Roland nodded. There must be a main force guarding Border Town, and the squad sent out must also return to Border Town before the months of the demons. In addition, there was the Golden Dragon and the food problem. A more active recruitment policy would naturally bring back more people, but the cost would also increase exponentially. The previous plan had a higher cost-performance ratio, but now it had a strong purpose, so how to implement it, they had to carefully consider. But the second point you mentioned, what should we do? First of all, release the news that the captured civilians will be sent back to King City, so that Timothy can roughly know the process of the battle, and he won't try such a futile thing again and again. But our artillery fighting method will also be exposed, Iron Axe said worriedly. It won't be exposed much, Roland gently tapped the table. Except for long-range attacks and amazing power, he won't know the principle, let alone know how to make it. As long as the level of production remained in this era, even if he knew, he wouldn't be able to fight back. This was the overwhelming advantage of hot weapons over cold weapons, and it wouldn't be reversed by willpower, tactics, or numbers. And these people will also send him a warning letter. A warning letter? That's right, I will give an advance notice of the day of attack in the letter, and then on that day, we will raid King City, the prince said word by word. Iron Axe couldn't help but open his mouth wide, and after a while, he came back to his senses and solemnly saluted. As long as it is your order, I will definitely complete it with my life. Relax, I don't want you to die, Roland smiled. This plan doesn't need the first army to participate, it will be carried out by the witches. How can I make Timothy fear the western region? He estimated that there was nothing more shocking than a direct attack on the palace. As long as Timothy realized that he was not safe, he was afraid that any plans to send troops would be somewhat restrained. Roland's plan came from the airdrop leaflets of later generations, and in addition to dropping leaflets, he also planned to send Timothy 2 aerial bombs. The so-called raid was a strike from the sky, and the possibility of directly killing the new king was very small, but as long as it could play a deterrent role, it would be considered a success. In this way, it would be difficult to determine whether the other side would insist on launching a large-scale attack. Roland clearly realized that the pattern of this battle for the throne had changed. He was no longer as weak as he was when he first arrived, and he didn't need to disguise himself anymore. Now it was time to reveal the cards in his hand, step by step standing on the political stage of Grey Castle, and let the people of the kingdom notice his existence. This had nothing to do with the desire to show off, but rather a kind of propaganda for his own territory and power. It was useless to obtain a kingdom full of corpses and ruins. He hoped that through this declaration, more people would go to the western region and stand by his side. When the sun fell behind the mountains, Roland opened the office window. The evening wind blowing on his face was no longer hot, but with a trace of coolness. Chapter 284. On the third day of autumn, the Marjorie Chamber of Commerce arrived at the pier of Border Town as scheduled. This time, the caravan returned to its former size. 10 sailboats lined up in a straight line and steadily docked at the side of the pier. Your Royal Highness, we meet again. Gammon, the merchant from Crescent Moon Bay, bowed and said, I heard from Lady Marjorie that the first steamship has been modified? Indeed, Roland laughed, but in order to ensure the quality of the goods, it still needs to undergo a trial voyage for 3 or 4 days in order to test the reliability of the power system. It's really something to look forward to. Marlin clapped his hands. The fleet also needs a few days to unload the cargo, so we can wait here. May I ask your Royal Highness, during the trial voyage, can I board the steamship for a tour? Of course. After all, it is a brand new ship, completely different from the previous sailboats. I still have to show you how to operate it. But according to the plan, this is all tomorrow's content. Roland made a gesture to follow me. The most important thing now is to relax your tired body. You haven't eaten lunch yet, right? I have already prepared a sumptuous banquet in the castle's living room. Every time I come here, I always enjoy a good meal. Marjorie covered her mouth and laughed. I'm really hungry now. Those wheat cakes and jerky are as hard as stones. It's hard to swallow. In this era, there was no reliable preservation technology, so most of the dry food was really dry and hard, which made Roland think of canned food. After the development of light industry, the production of a variety of delicious and convenient canned food would definitely be the best choice for long-distance travel and sailing merchants. When the banquet was over, Hogg patted his belly with a satisfied face. This bowl of mushroom soup almost made me swallow my tongue. It was as if I tasted seafood, stewed chicken, and pork bones at the same time. Your court chef is really superb. I prefer the dessert after the meal. It's called ice cream, right? Marjorie said, I guess it should be made from milk and honey, and then frozen into ice crystals with saltpeter. We also need to add some butter and egg white, otherwise, it wouldn't be so soft, Roland added. I wonder how much saltpeter we have this time. There is still only one ship. The female merchant shook her head. The Alchemist Association is still wantonly purchasing saltpeter, and the former Prime Minister even sent out patrols to assist them in plundering the goods from the saltpeter field. A group of people with the title of sage are no different from robbers. This ship of saltpeter was shipped from Redwater City. So this month's goods are mostly washing stones. That's right. Hogg drained the glass of white wine in one gulp and refilled it for himself. Although the quantity might be a little too much, you personally told me last time to get as much as possible, and I've kept that in mind. In addition to the washing stones, there were also good quality iron ingots and lead ingots. There are few towns that want them these days except yours, he sighed. The mining business is getting worse. This is the effect of the Civil War, Roland thought. The purchasing power of all places is gradually declining. If it continues for another 2 or 3 years, food prices will basically rise, and people will starve to death everywhere. By the way, what happened in the Western Territory recently? Marjorie suddenly asked. What happened? On the way to the town, the fleet encountered a lot of, well, she paused for a moment as if she was considering her words, a lot of floating corpses. They were dressed in rags and were floating on both sides of the river. In addition to the corpses, there were some broken planks and ropes on the water, as if a ship had hit a reef and sunk. But there are no reefs in the river, so I thought. Humph, that was Timothy's fleet that invaded the Western Territory. Roland pretended to be indignant and briefly described the battle a week ago. They have already received the punishment they deserve. In order to avoid blocking the channel and spreading the disease, after cleaning up the battlefield, he transferred Anna and Lily from the town. One was responsible for burning the damaged ships, the other was responsible for purifying the river. And the floating corpses that Marjorie saw should have been the dead that had already drifted along the river before the end of the battle. So that's how it is, the businesswoman said with a smile. It seems that Timothy has hit a wall on both sides. Both sides? There is also Garcia from the port of Clearwater. The latest news I got is that the unknown looters that attacked the Eastern Territory city before were Garcia's subordinates. After the Black Sail fleet looted Seawinshire and Valencia, they didn't return to the port, but instead went all the way north along the coastline. No one knows where they finally went. North. Roland was surprised. Did she leave Grey Castle? At present, it seems like so. Timothy's troops came to the port of Clearwater. It is now an empty city. Marjorie stated, because there were a lot of rats among the people he brought. This matter is not a secret in the Blackstreet. In any case, now the only thorn in his side is you, and in the future, the invasion of the Western Territory may become more frequent. If you also want to leave Grey Castle, Crescent Moon Bay will always welcome you. Marlin opened her mouth. That's right, Gammon patted his chest. The island there is enough to fit 10 border towns. We are willing to provide it to you and your people free of charge. But you have to hand over the technology of the steam engine and paddle steamer, right? Roland rolled his eyes in his heart. Even if he couldn't stay in Grey Castle, the first person he would choose to go to should be Tilly Wimbledon. But on the surface, he just smiled. Is that so? If such a day really comes, I will consider it. By the way, He then looked at Marjorie. "I have successfully made 2 of the reconnaissance balloons you ordered last time." "So fast?" The latter was pleasantly surprised. "Can you take me to see them?" "Of course, come with me," Roland got up and said. In the expanded backyard of the castle, a fully inflated hydrogen balloon was placed. Its air sac was in the shape of a water droplet, wide at the top and narrow at the bottom, with a diameter of 5 meters at the top. It was completely made according to the size of the experimental product, and could carry an adult man into the air. The air sac and the rope were painted with sky camouflage, and when paired with the observer's camouflage clothes, it could minimize recognition. "It seems to be different from the balloon we rode last time." Marjorie carefully looked at the new product. "That's because it doesn't require a witch to use it." Roland cleared his throat and began to explain to everyone how to use the balloon. The end of the balloon has a movable valve, which can be filled with and released gas. It's precisely because of this alchemy gas that it can fly. The method of inflating is very simple. Just connect the matching hose to the gas tank, and then unscrew the valves at both ends. After that, he demonstrated the operation process of deflating and inflating in front of everyone. "How many bottles of gas does it take to fill a reconnaissance balloon?" Marjorie quickly caught the key point. 5 or 6 bottles. This question made Roland slightly embarrassed. At most, it will not exceed 7 bottles. The main reason was that the concentration of dilute sulfuric acid used to generate hydrogen in the bottle was difficult to control, and distilling the sulfuric acid to 98% and then diluting it with water was too much of a waste of valuable laboratory manpower, so they had to make do with it. This kind of alchemy gas is very expensive, right? Indeed. It is difficult to store and full of danger. I mean, in the case of careless operation, Roland coughed twice, so the gas tank can only be stored for 1 year, and it cannot be knocked, disassembled, or burned, otherwise it may lead to unpredictable serious consequences. He paused. "Although the price is a little expensive, but rest assured, when you first buy the reconnaissance balloon, the first batch of gas tanks will be provided by Border Town for free, and you can also get an extra sky camouflage reconnaissance suit." Chapter 285. After the caravan left, Roland breathed a long sigh of relief. Finally, the treasury was full again. A total of 8 steam engines were delivered to the 3 chambers of commerce, 3 of which were produced by the Crescent Moon Bay Chamber of Commerce's No. 2 factory. It had to be said that these craftsmen from the fjords, whether it was talent or learning ability, were far better than the miners and blacksmiths of Border Town. After mastering the operation of the machine, the quality of the finished products rose sharply. Maybe in another 2 months, the production capacity of the No. 2 factory could catch up with that of the No. 1 factory. Fortunately, according to the signed contract, the revenue from the sale of these machines belonged to Roland. In addition, he also received a purchase order for a new hydrogen balloon from the Crescent Moon Bay caravan. Marlene was very interested in this kind of thing that could greatly expand one's field of vision. In addition to a single reconnaissance balloon, he also specially ordered a giant balloon that could carry 3 or 4 people, intending to use it to explore the new islands in the fjords. In addition to the delivery of the first paddle steamer, the 3 of them brought Border Town nearly 7,000 golden dragons. After deducting the cost of purchasing metal ingots, washing stones, food and other commodities, the remaining 6,000 golden dragons were enough to support his population expansion plan. Roland called Barav and Iron Axe into his office. "Now that we have extra money, it's time to go out and recruit more people." He looked at the 2 capable men. "This operation will be carried out by the cooperation of City Hall and the First Army. You can decide the specific personnel. I will only explain the general content of the task." "Please say it." The director nodded. "The recruitment will be divided into 2 directions, the north and the south." Roland pulled out a map from the table and spread it in front of the 2 men, especially the line from Eagle City to the port of Clearwater. "I suspect that Timothy has already regarded these people as part of Garcia's forces. They are useless people who can be used at will, so you have to be the first to win them over. The team sent by City Hall is responsible for recruiting nobles, craftsmen, and other literate people, while the First Army's main task is to recruit civilians. Unlike the previous propaganda, this time we should be more proactive. Do you understand what I mean? Iron Axe hesitated. You mean by force? Ahem, there's no need to go that far. Roland coughed twice. The Sand Nation style was indeed simple and crude. For example, distributing food, actively persuading, paying living expenses in advance, and so on. He glanced at Barav. You should be very clear about this. Of course, Your Highness. When I was in the capital, I helped the ministers and patrols many times to suppress and pacify refugee riots. The latter stroked his beard and said, their requirements are very simple. Sometimes they just want to fill their stomachs. So, there's no need to use money to win them over. Don't even mention that the salary is too generous. The fallen nobles, on the other hand, are much more troublesome. Although they are short of money and no longer have their glory days, they are experienced and knowledgeable and have high demands. They won't travel thousands of miles with us for a piece of steamed bun. That's why we need to lure them with money and promises. Roland clapped his hands twice in satisfaction. Unfortunately, there are many things to do in Border Town, so you can't go in person. Otherwise, this task would have been successfully completed. Please rest assured, Your Highness, I will send my best disciple. Barav laughed. When the city is built next year, both sides of the Redwater River will be filled with people. There will be such a day. After the two left, Roland leaned against the back of his chair and rested for a moment. He decided to go to the North Slope's backyard to see Anna. As soon as he entered the door, the first thing he saw was a floor full of metal cubes. Roland picked one up and placed it in the palm of his hand. They were basically the same size, about 5 centimeters long and wide. The surface was not smooth, as if it had been squeezed by something. One side was also engraved with a number. For example, the one in his hand was engraved with the number 256. How is it, did you find anything good? Number 1057 and number 2284, one is particularly hard, and the other is very good in both hardness and toughness. Anna greeted him and said, her face brimming with a bright and beautiful smile. You've already reached more than 2,000? Roland said in surprise. He took the record book from Lucia, which was densely filled with data. After finding the number 2284, he found that the carbon content was 0.8%, and the fourth unknown element was 15.2%. Well, this is much more interesting than sharpening the gun barrel. Anna blinked her eyes. Adding other metals into the iron can unexpectedly make its properties change dramatically. I really want to know how these metal balls are combined together. The exploration that Anna and Lucia were currently doing was a far-reaching work. Roland first let the little girl decompose the ore into a variety of raw materials, and then let Anna mix them with pure iron according to different mass ratios and smelt them. After making them into a test block, their properties were tested. Through the squeezing and stretching of the black fire, Anna was able to distinguish the amount of magic consumed in each operation, thereby judging its strength and toughness. The first to add was obviously carbon. Although Roland knew that the essence of steel was a kind of iron-carbon alloy. With too much carbon it would be pig iron, without carbon it would be pure iron. Only when the carbon content was within a certain range could it be called steel, and even the slightest fluctuation could greatly change the properties of the metal, so the first thing to be measured was the size of this range. From the records, it could be seen that before 1500, it was simply iron and carbon smelting, but after 1500, it began to add new elements to the foundation of steel. Roland clearly knew that with every additional number in the permutation, the possible results would increase exponentially. This was an extremely long process, so he only let Anna explore this part of the content when the manufacturing task wasn't too heavy. He gave the two witches a few words of encouragement, then sat to the side, quietly admiring the busy figure of Anna. Although the autumn sun was still bright, it was no longer as vicious as it was in the middle of summer. He felt warm all over, and a long-lost sense of stability welled up in his heart. After an unknown amount of time, the courtyard gradually quieted down. He suddenly felt a soft hand placed in front of his forehead, and when he opened his half-closed eyes, Lucia had already disappeared, and Anna was sitting in front of him, You have something to say to me. Your eyes told me, she said, tilting her head, the ends of her hair hanging down naturally, like strands of translucent golden silk. Roland hesitated for a moment, and finally shook his head helplessly. I'm just a little confused, that's all. He roughly explained the population expansion plan to the other side. Compared to the initial free choice, now in order to seize the time, we have already used some half-tempting, half-coercive means. Although this is to prevent them from being forcibly recruited by Timothy, and finally dying from the erosion of the pills, when I think about it seriously, what I'm doing isn't too far from what he's doing. The only difference is the purpose. The purpose still doesn't explain everything? She asked softly. But, I know what you want to say. Anna covered the prince's mouth. You're worried that they won't appreciate your kindness, and at the same time you can't guarantee that your purpose will always be correct in the future. Using the wrong means to achieve the right goal will be misunderstood, or using the right means to achieve the right goal will lead to an irreversible mistake. You don't know whether the right means are more important, or the right results are more important. Am I right? Chapter 286. The environment of Sleeping Island was getting better day by day. As long as Tilly flew up, she could see the crowds and the lively market. Now, it was no longer a place where the original 300 witches lived in seclusion. Through negotiations, Crescent Moon Bay, Twin Dragon Island, Sunset Harbor and Shallow Water Town among the Fjords Islands had established commercial relations with Sleeping Island. She also introduced a group of ordinary residents from some crowded villages and small islands. Although they were currently concentrated on the periphery of the island, far away from the witches, Tilly believed that one day, Sleeping Island would become an integrated city. The integration was a slow but hopeful process. Whether the awakened witches from other islands joined Sleeping Island or stayed in their birthplace and were accepted by the local people, it was good news for Sleeping Island. This meant that Tilly and the migrated witches would gain more supporters. Come down, the wind is picking up, Ashes shouted from below. Be careful not to fall. I'm fine. She waved her hand, and suddenly her body sank down. She fell for a distance before she could stabilize her body. Well, it's still a little hard to control. You know it's hard to control, but you still fly so high. Ashes stamped her feet. You can practice at a lower place or go to the sea. If you don't come down, I'll climb up to the roof to catch you. Okay, I got it. Tilly felt the wind was indeed getting stronger, so she didn't try to be brave anymore. She withdrew the magic power she released and slowly landed in the garden of her residence. Next time when you do this kind of thing, call Molly first, Ashes said with her eyes wide open. At least her magic servant can catch you. As long as I keep supplying magic power, it's impossible to fall. At most, I can't control the direction. She took off the blue magic stone gloves in her hand and handed them to Ashes. You can also try it. The feeling of flying is amazing. Looking down at Sleeping Island from the sky, it feels like the whole world has become a new one. I don't think so. Ashes waved her hand. I couldn't even activate the lightning magic stone at the beginning, let alone this kind of stone that needs to be continuously injected with magic power. And there's only one of it. Even if I master the control skills, I can't fly with you. That's true. Tilly took back the gloves with a little regret. I often think it would be great if I could understand the principle and make my own magic stone. Do you think it's man-made? Of course. She nodded without hesitation. From the polished appearance and use, these stones are unlikely to be natural. The people who built the ruins must have a deeper understanding of magic power. Unfortunately, apart from a bunch of incomprehensible documents, they didn't leave any more clues. At this moment, a huge white figure fell from the sky. Due to the speed of its descent, it almost hit the ground with a plop, stirring up a circle of dust. Maggie! Ashes raised her eyebrows. It hurts so much, Koo. It was the little girl. She got up from the ground and rubbed her head. Did I see wrongly just now? Maggie and bye, she is. If it wasn't for the hair color, I would have thought it was lightning. You weren't mistaken. I did fly up just now. Tilly smiled and rubbed her cheeks. So, Are the witches of Sleeping Island living well in Border Town? Very good, Coo. They all asked me to deliver letters to you. Maggie rummaged through the letters in her satchel. This is Lotus's, this is Evelyn's, and this is His Royal Highness's. Tilly was slightly startled. She saw that His Royal Highness's letter was half a finger thick, and it was wrapped tightly, looking more like a parcel. It was a little heavy in his hand. Obviously, it contained more than a simple letter. Thank you for your hard work. Ashes took out half a wheat cake, broke off a small piece and handed it to Maggie. Maggie shook her head, stuffed a handful of dried fish into her mouth, and said vaguely, I'm going to play with Molly. Then she transformed back into a giant white pigeon, flapped her wings and flew out of the garden. Why do I feel that after not seeing her for a month, she has become even bigger? I have the same feeling, Tilly laughed, probably because life in Border Town is really good. Back in the house, she tore open the letter sent by Roland Wimbledon. She found that in addition to the letter full of content, the rest of the dozen or so pages were unexpectedly filled with lifelike drawings. What is this? Ash's question was also the doubt in Tilly's heart. She shook her head and spread out the drawings one by one. The content was somewhat unbelievable. The background was like an evening in the wilderness. Under the blood-red sunset, two terrifying monsters were fighting with a group of witches. The witches were obviously at a disadvantage. Their abilities seemed to have lost their effect. Whether it was a poisonous snake or a fireball, they were unable to stop the enemy. When she saw the last picture, several witches had already fallen into a pool of blood. Tilly frowned. The scene in front of her was undoubtedly drawn by the witches. Only magic could create such a lifelike image. But were these just simple paintings, or had they really happened before? She grabbed the letter uneasily and quickly skimmed through it. Soon, Tilly felt her heart tighten. The repeated word in the letter made her hands tremble slightly. Devil. What's wrong? Ashes held her wrist. What's written in the letter? The past of the Witch Cooperation Association. She patted the back of her hand, indicating that she was fine. They once searched for the Holy Mountain in the barbarian land. You should still remember the Holy Mountain, right? Yes, according to the legend, the Holy Mountain is the final resting place of witches. You can find true peace and tranquility in the Holy Mountain, but this is just an illusory rumor, Ashes said disapprovingly. We can also live peacefully on Sleeping Island. The demonic bite is a lie made by the church. But Haraka believes that the Holy Mountain really exists, and she once found an ancient book in the ruins of the Eastern Forest. She believed that the gate to the Holy Mountain is in that forbidden area where no one has ever set foot. So she led the Witch Cooperation Association to cross the impassable mountain range and went to the barbarian land. However, the witches didn't find the Holy Mountain, but instead encountered a terrible monster. Tilly whispered. The kind in the painting? Ashes sucked in a breath of cold air. Her expression was somewhat heavy. The letter said that they had amazing strength, agility, and could command demonic beasts. One of them could also release lightning from her hands, just like the witch's ability. In the end, more than 40 witches, only 6 of them survived. Later, they were driven into a corner and decided to rely on the Lord of Border Town. So it was actually like this. Also, what I don't understand is that at the end of the ancient book, there was a scribbled essay written in the language of the 4 kingdoms. Tilly turned to the back of the letter. It mentioned the Holy City, the war with the devil, and Alice's God's Punishment Army experiment. It should be something that happened more than 400 years ago. But since they know the language of the 4 kingdoms, why did they use a completely different language to record documents and books? After thinking for a long time without any results, the 5th princess simply put all these things aside and took out Sylvain's letter, intending to first understand the results of the investigation of the Lord of Border Town. As a result, the first sentence of the letter made her stunned, even more shocked than when she saw the word devil. Chapter 287. Her real brother. Her real brother? How could this be possible? Tilly held the letter in a daze, but her mind was completely unable to concentrate. The thoughts in her mind were like a tide rolling over and over. Among the 5 children of her father, Wimbledon 3, Gerald, Timothy and Garcia were born earlier, so they belonged to the same circle. By the time Roland was born, the youngest, Garcia, was already 6 years old, so naturally, she didn't play with him anymore. It was reasonable to say that she should have formed another circle with Roland, but, in fact, this was not the case. Her brother yearned for her 2 brothers and tried to integrate into their circle, but the result was that he was often the one being bullied. This led to Roland's character becoming distorted and irritable. Of course, he didn't dare to vent his anger on Gerald and the others, so he could only vent it on himself. For example, he instigated her to steal her father's crown. After being rejected, he would inevitably become angry and humiliate her, and sometimes he would even fight with her. Later, when her father found out, he taught her a lesson and restrained himself a lot, but he still did all kinds of small tricks to intimidate her. These things may not have been understandable at that time, but now in retrospect, Tilly only felt that it was quite ridiculous and childish. Until the age of 10, she found an earthworm broken into several pieces in her beloved shoe. Unable to bear it, she finally decided to fight back. She called Roland, and when he opened his mouth to threaten her, she directly stuffed the earthworm into his mouth. Since then, he had never taken the initiative to provoke her, and she was also unwilling to pay attention to her brother. After reaching adulthood, Roland still didn't change and even became worse. She often heard about his debauchery. In the rumors of the nobles, he was irritable, mean, ignorant and incompetent, and could be regarded as the most unlike a noble. Apart from his royal status, he had nothing. Regarding this evaluation, Tilly deeply agreed. She also knew that his irritable behavior was just a facade, in order to cover up his biggest weakness, timidity and cowardice. However, such a person would actually stand on the side of witches, shelter a group of people known as the devil's minions, and even become enemies with the church? Tilly didn't know what to say. Tilly? It was not until Ashes shook her twice that she came back to her senses. I'm fine, it's just a little unbelievable. She shook her head. Sylvie said that the Lord of Border Town is most likely the real Roland Wimbledon, and not someone controlled or replaced by a witch. That stupid cough guy who tried to touch me? Ashes coughed twice. He has indeed changed a lot. We haven't seen each other for a year, but apart from his appearance, I feel like I'm looking at a different person. Can you be more specific? Ashes tilted her head and thought for a long time. I think the biggest difference should be the cleanliness. Clean, whether it's the way you dress up or the feeling you give off. He doesn't like jewelry like the other nobles. He doesn't have any gold, silver, or precious stones on him. Ashes recalled, even his clothes are very common. They look relatively loose, without lace, ornaments, or gold. If it weren't for his hair color being too conspicuous, he would almost be no different from an ordinary person. But he doesn't look like an ordinary person at all. Does he look like a noble? Tilly asked. No, he doesn't look like a noble at all. Ashes curled her lips. There is no noble who is clean. If it's not a pool of stagnant water, then it's covered with mud. As for him, I don't know the specifics, but in short, he gives people a good feeling. It's hard to believe that you're speaking for him. I just want to answer your question seriously. Tilly exhaled. It seemed that her brother had changed a lot, but in the end, what had led to his transformation? Or was it because of some reason that she couldn't detect that he had unknowingly changed into another person? The 5th princess suddenly remembered Roland's first letter. For this reason, I must destroy the entire church, turn the saying that witches are evil into dust, and save all the people from their foolishness and ignorance. This is a long process, and I need more of your assistance. As for what made me make this decision, and what made me no longer as indifferent to everything as I was in the past, I can slowly talk about these trivial matters in detail when I have the opportunity. Perhaps only when I see him in person will I know the real reason. Withdrawing her thoughts, Tilly shifted her gaze back to the letter. The second half of the letter was about what Sylvie had seen and heard in Border Town. The original reason why Roland had chosen her was to explore the mineral resources, but in the North Slope mine, she had found a large number of God's stones of retaliation. It turned out that this kind of stone that could suppress the witch's ability was the same as other ores growing from the ground. So, the holy city of Hermes must also control such a vein, which could produce a steady stream of God's stones of retaliation. Further down, another message caught her attention. It was a weapon that could shoot iron balls and bolts from an iron tube. It was extremely powerful and was accompanied by a deafening roar. Although Maggie and Ashes had both mentioned such a thing, it was the first time that she had seen such a detailed description of it. There was even a hand-drawn diagram at the bottom of this paragraph. So this is what the thing that shot me looks like. Ashes moved her head closer to Roland's. Since he's an ally, you can ask him to send a batch of weapons to Sleeping Island in his reply, saying that it's to defend against the church. If he is not willing, this ally is probably not as reliable as you think. Allies don't mean that they are defenseless, Tilly said with a smile. This kind of weapon is obviously his foundation. How can he easily give it to others? This kind of test will only destroy the trust that was built up with great difficulty, and I didn't write Molly and Wind Whisper in the list of witches' abilities that I gave him. Moreover, this winter we will go to Border Town anyway. When the time comes it will be easier to talk face to face, won't it? Well, Ashes spread out her hands and said, whatever you say. Tilly smiled and continued to read the letter. When her line of sight swept to the end of the letter, she could not help but be stunned. Roland actually invented a kind of underwear for women's breasts, and gave it as a gift to every adult woman in the Witch Union? This was simply too preposterous. One must know that giving intimate clothes is something that only lovers do. How can he wait? Tilly suddenly remembered that when he was in King City, it seemed that he had also given corsets to some noble ladies, and some of them had even been directly thrown in his face, becoming a laughing stock among the nobles. This is indeed something that he would do. Tilly suddenly felt conflicted. On the one hand, he was more in line with the image in her memory, but on the other hand, she felt that it would be better if he didn't. Chapter 288. Western Region, Border Town. The washing stones purchased from Silver City filled 4 ships, and it took several days just to unload them. Now that there were enough raw materials, the soap production plan should be officially put on the agenda. The supporting factory and warehouse had already been set up, and the soap factory was located next to the industrial park, next to the number 2 steam assembly plant, with the same shape. The roof, beams and wallboards were all made of wood, and the size was a circle smaller. Moreover, the cutting and hoisting of the wood were all handled by the witches, so the construction period only took a short week. Using washing stones, that is, natural alkali, to make soap was essentially a series of chemical reactions. The raw materials needed were also very common. In addition to soda ash, a large amount of lime milk and grease were also needed. Lime milk was the suspension at the bottom of the container after lime was immersed in water. It was used to react with soda ash to produce caustic soda, and then the caustic soda reacted with grease to produce high-grade fatty acid salts and glycerol. The former was even soap, while the latter was an extremely important raw material for explosives. Before, when making soap, Roland had already tested the whole reaction process in the castle backyard. The principle was basically the same, but in order to expand a small amount of trial production to mass production, he still needed to develop reasonable processes and specifications, and more importantly, he needed professional chemists to guide the production. For this reason, he called the chief alchemist into his office. Your Royal Highness, you asked for a large-scale production of sulfuric acid. I have already thought of a possible plan. As soon as he entered the door, Kyle Sichi shouted loudly, however, this requires a large amount of lead, as well as a blacksmith who can turn the lead into containers. I heard that one of your witches can accurately cut metal, and those rumbling iron lumps were made by her. Can I? Of course. Report to me the shape and size of the container you require. I'll have the Witch Union do it. Roland beckoned him to sit down. I didn't ask you to come here today to make acid, but for another task. Your Royal Highness, recently I really can't find time to do anything else. Kyle repeatedly shook his head. Large-scale acid production is a difficult challenge. I must go all out. He paused and then added, "Even my disciples can't do it. They are all helping me prepare for this. No one can leave." "Rest assured, it won't take too much of your time." Roland took a sip of tea. "You also don't need to transfer your proud disciples. Just a few apprentices will be enough." "Then, what's the mission?" "Manufactured soap is a cheaper version of the soap sold in the convenience market. Other than the smell, it has the same function as soap. It can be used for bathing, washing clothes, and cleaning tableware." "Is it the saponification reaction mentioned in elementary chemistry?" Kyle asked while stroking his beard. "The reaction that uses sodium hydroxide and oil to produce alcohols and salts?" It had to be said that hearing standard chemical terms from an alchemist's mouth was a very strange feeling, especially when the term was coined by him. Roland held back his laughter and nodded seriously. "That's right. It's the saponification reaction recorded in the ancient books. I also used it to figure out how to make soap." "Then what do you need me to do?" "If it's not very important, I suggest you put it off until later. After all, it's fine even if your subjects don't bathe for a few days. They can just soak their clothes and plates in the river." "It is very important," said the prince emphatically. "Or rather, the manufacture of soap is not important, but the byproduct of its production is something I need at present." "You mean the mellow?" Kyle didn't think much of it. "Yes, alcohol. You can also call it glycerin," said Roland. "It is a very important raw material, and its significance is no less than the two acids." "Well," Kyle Sichi shrugged. "But I have to say, I don't have the time to implement it myself." He gently exhaled. Dealing with the chief alchemist was really tiring. "You only need to pick out a few clever apprentices and demonstrate it in front of them. I will recruit some of my subjects to carry out the production, but after all, they know nothing about chemistry, so there must be someone to check every step." The prince paused for a moment. "You can also think of it as a chemical experiment that has never been put into practice. If it was in an alchemy workshop, this process could mean the discovery of several alchemy formulas, enough to make an apprentice obtain the title of alchemist." It was probably the last sentence that convinced Kyle. "In that case, I will take the afternoon to teach the apprentices what you have arranged." "Very good," Roland smiled. "You should also know that the most important part of the production process is to produce a sufficient amount of sodium hydroxide." He wrote down the reaction formula on a piece of paper. Before the invention of the synthetic alkali process, natural alkali was the most important raw material for making alkali. The latter's main component was sodium bicarbonate, which could be decomposed into sodium carbonate, carbon dioxide, and water when heated. Because of the abundance of raw materials and the simplicity of the process, it was still in use until modern times. Heat and decompose the washing stone, dissolve it in water, and filter it, and you can get a relatively pure sodium carbonate solution. Next, heat it with the lime milk, and you can get a sodium hydroxide solution. The purification method should be easy for you to think of, he explained while writing. Clarify, distill, mix, and repeat this step until the concentration of the solution is high enough that after cooling a large number of crystals can be precipitated. These were all the contents of the elementary chemistry. Because of the many nicknames of the two alkali, it was extremely easy to confuse them, such as caustic soda, soda ash, sodium bicarbonate, and so on. It was also an important knowledge point for the exam, and he had memorized the relevant contents of the textbook, so he could still remember it clearly. "I understand." The chief alchemist looked at the reaction formula from beginning to end. "But Your Highness, what about the oil?" "I will arrange for these materials to be sent to you." Animal oil was still an expensive thing in this era, but the last time the personal guard went on a trip to purchase seeds from the olive trees in Fallen Dragon Ridge, Border Town now had a reliable source of vegetable oil. Although they were currently only growing them on a small scale in the castle's backyard, with Leaf's ability to accelerate the ripening process, it wouldn't be a problem to harvest a bunch of fruits in a day. The extraction of olive oil was also very simple. After the fruit was ripe, the oil could be squeezed out using a physical method, and then through a filter to remove the debris and dregs, they would be able to obtain a clear oil. Finally, After briefly explaining the production of the soap and the requirements for the glycerin extraction, Roland let Kyle Sichi leave the office. In this way, when the soap factory started operating, he would have a stable source of glycerin. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.